Thank you for attending. We want to get this started as quickly as possible. It is a very lengthy presentation, and with the interaction, it's going to take a little bit, so we don't want to waste your time. There will be people that are coming in and out, so we also want to respect those that, even though it's a Saturday, you know, many of us are still busy. I want to first thank the leadership at Blackhawk here who allowed us to use their space for this meeting. We'll be talking about space needs and the ability to host meetings. It's very nice that there's areas like Blackhawk Church here that can give us this opportunity to get together. In addition, one thing that I failed is there's a very, very small staff in the city of Fitchburg that run Fact TV. And it's very, very seldom that we recognize and thank them of coming out here to film each and every one of these meetings for you all to have the opportunity to review. Or if you missed something and you want to go back, it's all videotaped. It's all on our website, city website, and you can find that and archive it. And that crew is working several hours to handle all the different meetings that go on at the city of Fitchburg. I also want you all to recognize the elected officials that are sitting amongst you that come to many meetings and also get involved with the community. We currently have, for Alders, we have Randy Udell, Bill Jetzer, and Dave Herbst. There may be some Alders or our mayor may be showing up later, and we'll acknowledge them at the end. We also have County Supervisor Dana Pelaban.
I'm right here.
That way, okay.
I don't want to stand, I'm sorry.
We have Police and Fire Commissioner Don Dantzler. And we also have Greg Jones from the NAACP that's present.
Just wave.
Thank you also all for being here and being a part of the presentation. You all are going to hear some of the responses and the questions that are raised from you all here in our community. We have 4 of us that are going to present. The main presenter is going to be Lieutenant Ned Hartwick. It's also going to be followed by Deputy Chief Matt Leahy and Lieutenant Andrew McCarthy. I'll jump in at the beginning, middle, and end. So we're all here available. We all have different duties in this presentation. We all have been burning the candle here to get things done because we know it's important for us to get this information to you. 2 more Alders that walk in, Gabriela Gerhardt and Joe Maldonado. So we'll get started.
All right, thank you everyone. Again, as Chief mentioned, my name is Ned Hartwick. I'm a lieutenant, and I'm just days away from celebrating my 15th anniversary here with the city of Fitchburg. Thank you for taking time out of your Saturday afternoon. It means a lot. I love connecting with community members, neighborhood association meetings, wherever we can. We've taken some feedback, so for those of you that have picked a couch or a more comfortable chair, this is a bit of a longer presentation, so you did good and we were able to provide those seats for you. We also pointed out that we made the error of scheduling during a Badger basketball game, so one of these guys will provide score updates periodically. I don't think we'll be able to throw up the highlight reel, so you'll have to check that out later. So if you notice, my voice is a little hoarse, so it's been a long week. This is the 4th meeting that we've been putting on throughout the community, and I'll touch on why I'm a little bit more tired than usual in a second here. Today what we want to do is we want to break this into a few chunks because this is a large presentation, and we fully recognize that this is a large project that is going to have an impact on hopefully our entire community in a positive way, but we also recognize that there's a financial component that is a burden that will be spread among our community, and we want to hopefully make the case that this is a worthwhile investment. So we're going to break this into chunks, and as the chief mentioned, this is an opportunity for us to interact and ask questions. We hope everyone can, and we've had great success with people being respectful of different opinions. So we're breaking this into these chunks to have an opportunity to ask questions, but I do ask that we kind of wait until the end of each one of these sections before we get into questions. Some key points that we want to talk about. This is a project that is built upon the concept that both City Hall and the police department have exceeded their capacity. This church is a good example. Everywhere around this church is a good example of how the city is growing, right? Anytime you drive to a new part of the city, you see growth. And so just like that growth that you see going up, these amenities, this new housing, City Hall and the police department have growth needs as well. So this is what we're talking about. Recently, there was a story published that Fitchburg is the fastest growing city in the state. And Dane County is certainly the fastest growing region in the state. We'll talk about why that's important. This is a city project. This is not just a police department project. We have done our best to take charge. We're supported by lots of different teammates in this effort, but this benefits the city and the entire community. This discussion has been going on for 10 years, and we'll talk about that. And we hope that this discussion has benefits well past 20 years into our community. The other thing I want to talk about here, just as a brief aside, because this has had an impact on our community, has an impact on members of the police department. Fitchburg is a safe place. Dane County is a safe place. And we don't want to come across as though we're scaring people, but I think it's also important when we're all distracted these days as to where we get our news from and do we trust the information that we're getting from news media and those kinds of things, that we are being realistic about what's going on in our community. And it is safe, again, to go out and walk your dog and to do the things that you want to do to enjoy life, enjoy our parks. But there are things that the police department is responsible for that has a real impact on the availability of your police department, where we're spending our time, and realistically, the threat to public safety that exists. So in the last 2 weeks, there have been a number of activities in the city, including in 1 week alone, 3 search warrants that were executed, one by a federal law enforcement agency, one by the City of Madison Police Department, and one by our police department, all related to gun violence and drugs. And we're recovering automatic weapons in those search warrants. We're recovering a substantial amount of drugs and narcotics. The other thing that unfortunately we've been talking a lot about recently in Dane County is gun violence. And I don't mean to be overly dramatic with this, but this bag right here has nearly 300 bullets in it. These represent the number of shell casings that we have collected during our investigations in the last 3 years. Every one of these bullets, well, you might think that gunfire on Pike Drive or Post Road or other parts of the city might not impact you. It does. It impacts you in a number of ways because we spend a considerable amount of time on these incidents. We had an incident on December 23rd in a parking lot of a bar where a gunshot was fired. Yesterday, our entire police department and then some, calling in people off duty to respond, to assist, helped us execute multiple search warrants across Dane County, other communities, to find the person responsible and to find evidence. That is hundreds of hours of time spent on this investigation and thousands of dollars in personnel costs and overtime related to this, to address what I think is a substantial threat to you all, in the sense that any one of those nearly 300 bullets fired, and this is happening any time of the day, can strike someone as they're driving down the Beltline, can go into your home. We've had multiple investigations where rounds fired have gone into homes. So in the middle of the night, you have nothing to do with dealing drugs or disputes with individuals, but one of those 300 bullets could come into your home. And so again, the sky is not falling. Fitchburg is a safe place. But what we're up against is a number of challenges, including societal issues and staffing issues and a whole bunch of things that we think this project can help address and improve and enhance the quality of life for our community and make for a better police department and a safer place. So when I explained that I'm a little tired yesterday after doing these 3 prior meetings this week, I'm up at 3 o'clock in the morning yesterday getting ready for these search warrants and spending my entire day preparing for those, dealing with those, and then making some refinements to this PowerPoint. So we have a dedicated team of people. The conversations have been had that the police department's at a breaking point or near a breaking point. I would offer that we are well past a breaking point. We have officers that are being ordered in on a regular basis, working 12, 16-hour days on a very regular basis. And our staffing challenges have brought us down to the point that we sometimes have 3 officers covering 35 square miles of our city. When I started in 2009, when the population of the city was significantly less, we had 3 officers working as a minimum. We can do better in a number of ways, and we think that this project is a part of that. So we're going to talk about some historical context here in a second, but return on investment, we're going to touch on these things, so I just want you to think about them as we go along and where this project might help with financial impact here. So enhanced and more efficient service, a more capable and competent police force. We're going to be meeting current and future space needs, which is, instead of having to do this project over again, we think it's a good investment. Increased retention, I just talked about that to a degree, and we're going to talk about what that means a little bit later. Potential savings through reduction in risk and loss, we'll touch on that. Revenue from training components, additional space for community. So we can't even host a meeting like this right now. I'm trying to host a law enforcement event, and we don't have any space in our facility, and there are very few spaces in City Hall that can host it that are available. Decreased vehicle idling. This is a topic that has a lot of implications, but I think we all can agree that we don't want to have empty police vehicles idling for a long period of time for a number of reasons. So the road here, 1999, Fitchburg City Hall, who I think most of you have seen or visited for a variety of reasons, is built. And the decision was made to locate the police department in the lower 2 levels in an area that I feel is kind of inaccessible. Kind of hard to find. If you've come in to drop off things at the police department, pick up records, you know that it's not the most easy to find. City Hall occupies there. The city starts growing rapidly after that, and space needs start becoming apparent. Less than 15 or almost 15 years later, a space needs study was commissioned by the city and identified some needs. And in 2016, the project was first mentioned in the city's capital improvement plan budget, which is the city's, of the 2 budgets that the city runs, the operating budget and the CIP. This is for larger facilities, larger infrastructure projects. The space needs study looked at several different horizons, going out 5, 10, 20 years, and as you'll notice here in a second, we're already well past a lot of these things in the space needs study. It looked not only at space, but also at staffing, so the space is predicted, is built on predictions related to our staffing needs. So this is looking at gross square footage. It identified that by 2020, 5 years after the space needs study was published, that we would basically need to triple our current size to accommodate our people, our things, and our vehicles. Projecting out to 2035, which really hard to believe isn't that far away, it said that we need to go up to 80,000 square feet. And here today, we'll talk about the number of people that we have working in our current facility. We still sit at less than 20,000 square feet. In that space needs study, identified several immediate needs, and immediate is kind of a relative term. You know, do you need immediate emergency care, medical care? Do you need, immediately need to do something? These are things that are identified as immediate, and so I'd argue that that time has kind of passed here. One of the key things is evidence storage. Our evidence storage sits in the basement of our facility, which is an exposure risk and a potential loss risk for that evidence. Our armory sits in the basement and faces the same challenges. We're out of office space, we're out of conference rooms, and we also have a lack of indoor parking facilities. Now that means a couple different things. It means our vehicles idle more, and it means that we are dealing with elements, and this is a perfect example. When I worked the night shift and I'd get an emergency call, there were many nights in the winter where I'd have to go out and scrape 2 to 3 inches of snow and ice off my windshield before I could go out and respond to an emergency. Now, if you're calling 911 and you're expecting the police to show up, are you thinking that a couple of those minutes are going to be spent scraping the windshield off? On top of that, once I get that ice off, then my computer would take 20 to 30 minutes to fire up because it's so cold. I'm not going to read through this, but I want to share as we talk about CIP discussions and the length of this conversation. This has been going on. It was first included in the 2017 capital improvement plan budget. Continues on, discuss different modifications to it as the council addressed the issue of space needs, not only for the police department, but for the city. And it continued on with modifications, and we'll talk about where we stand right now. So this is Again, something that's been going on through multiple city councils. Our current process. So at the beginning of last year, $25 million sat in that CIP budget to build the facility. It had previously risen up to $35 million. In April, the City Common Council, after a competitive bid process, this was noticed out to the public, FGM Architects was selected as the architectural and design firm. FGM Architects has a presence throughout the country. They've done over 300 police facilities, and suffice to say, they know what they're doing. They've seen things work well. They've seen things not work so well. They've had experience with a variety of communities and their own challenges. In June, FGM starts spending a considerable amount of time with all city staff and primarily police department staff, all work groups, to get feedback as to what we need to do our jobs here in Fitchburg. They're not coming in with a cookie cutter design. They're designing a facility to meet our needs now and in the future. In July, the Common Council, after a competitive bid process again, properly noticed and put out, selects Pepper Construction as the city's construction management company. Now, their role is to provide professional guidance and to manage the project as essentially a general contractor would in a large project. Now, as a note, they can't build our facility. They are contracted as our management firm. July, the first meeting of the Police Oversight Committee, Facility Committee is held, and that committee is comprised of elected officials, police department personnel, and citizens and city staff. Alder Jim Wheeler is the chair of that committee. That's a public committee. Anyone can attend those meetings. You can review those meetings. You can review agendas and participate. That's one way you can participate in this process. They have since met 3 times over the course of this time. Also, $10 million then gets included back into the CIP budget for the project, bringing the total back up to $35 million. And November, it's not up here, but our first public information meeting was held in November. At that time, we still didn't have a definitive cost available to share on the project. We had an estimate. And then in December, after that meeting, we had the first official project estimate, very formal and more detailed estimate coming in from our construction management company. Building on that timeline, originally, the approval of the schematic design, which we'll show you in a second here, and potential budget amendment for funding was scheduled to go to the council. We'll talk about why that's changed. Not necessarily a bad thing. February, moving into the future timeline, public meeting for design development, which is the next phase, getting more detailed. Moving through Common Council design, Common Council approves that design. Bidding would be scheduled to open in summer. Common Council would then approve the bids in September, construction beginning, and then in May of 2026, move out of the current space, which again opens up almost 20,000 square feet for City Hall space, and move into the new space. In addition to the Common Council and the Police Facility Oversight Committee, there are a number of other committees, and I just noticed I missed one on here, but includes the Board of Public Works, Finance, Resource Conservation Committee, which talks about sustainability, and the Fitchburg Center Committee, also the planning. Public engagement, this question has come up pretty extensively. How have we informed our community about this project? This is the 4th of meetings that we've had this year, and I mentioned we had the other meeting in November. And we have been talking about this project since really the beginning of the year through a variety of outlets, including social media, Back TV, and our monthly community meetings that we've been having prior to these meetings here. Those community meetings focused on things like what's going on in our community. So now's the time to pause. If anyone can get me a score update here in the Badger game, and I'll start taking your questions. Questions on the process?
So I sort of new to residency in Fitchburg. Is the transportation, that's the concern I brought to your attention, wanting to learn more, is that covered by Public Works? So I'm wondering how transportation has been considered in the process.
Transportation.
Yeah, roadways because more traffic going in is going to be changes to the traffic pattern.
Yeah, so transportation and the use of ingress and egress out of the facility in the City Hall campus, yeah, that's included as part of this concept here, and that's where we're bringing in other city staff from our Public Works and Transportation engineer. Oh, other questions? Yeah.
When the growth study was done to look at, you kind of showed that slide that talked about the square footage growing, do you know roughly what are the numbers for like population
Yep.
anticipation that go along?
That's a great question. We're going to get into that
Okay,
here in
cool.
just a second. Yes.
So thank you for the timeline. It gives us a really good idea of when things were approved and how this has gone. So I don't see in here when the training facility was introduced, and was that a part of the initial need study? Has there been an analysis or a need study for that portion of the building?
So the training components were first discussed, I want to say, when was that conversation? I think it was discussed initially, but not formally introduced into the space needs study. I think over time, as we talked about what the police department would see as a need, I think those discussions were had. I don't have a specific timeline, but it's not a brand new concept that just came in January.
So is that a part of the needs analysis?
No, it was not an original need there. So we'll talk about where we're looking at square footage there in a second. Other questions? I got bright lights on me, so bear with me here.
Can you change those? Is that possible?
Yeah. I think the lighting is back there.
Can you talk about the thoughts that went into the initial decision to allocate 25 million instead of the original estimated 35, and then later to add 10 more back in?
So in full disclosure, that had nothing to do with the police department other than providing. So the question is, what were the considerations about the $25 million versus the $35 million? I can tell you that one of the first things, and we'll see a slide here in a second, where that $25 million was based on the study that was done, kind of giving an idea with gross square footage numbers, okay? So we'll kind of put a pin in that. Other questions on the process? Yes?
Just curious, I know these are informational meetings, like what are going to be the chances to actually have the public like weigh in on, design features or budget or anything like that?
So we'll talk about the ability to weigh in. Any common council meeting, police facility oversight committee meetings, those are the opportunities those are agended meetings, much like any city council meeting on any other decision. These are informational meetings to give people time to digest things. I'll talk about a little bit to a degree that, obviously with respect to budget and spending taxpayers' dollars, the one unique feature here, the library has been discussed as a close parallel. This is a facility that, with the exception of the public meeting spaces where we can have community engagement, I don't really want to see most of you. I don't really want to see the public spending time because ideally you're not a victim of a crime. And certainly, ideally, you're not in handcuffs and in the other part of our facility. So that's kind of a unique thing as we talk about getting community input on the design elements. Now, the exterior design elements, that's addressed with the Fitchburg Center, the Promega Group, and there is going to be some other opportunities. Resource Conservation Committee is looking for public feedback on sustainability. Planning looks at those types of things. How do we want this facility to look on the exterior? What other exterior community amenities might be available? Benches, those types of things out front to make that space inviting. But does that kind of help answer your question?
It does. I know that there's potential vote in council in February is postponed.
Mm-hmm.
So just between now and then, how many opportunities do we have to actually make that meeting?
So there'll be three, if someone wants to correct me from council here, there's 3 council meetings, including that February meeting, is that right? And then resource conservation is Monday. Any other meetings that are out there that I'm missing? So those are public meetings, and then we'll talk about the ways to send comments that are being distributed to the design team, the police department, and common council. Yes?
I have one more process question. So I will project. So the competitive bid process to pick the architects makes total sense, to pick the construction company makes total sense. What if the architects come back with proposed designs that they cannot get within the approved budget, just like hypothetically, is there a part of the process where we say, if you cannot meet the needs of the approved budget, we are now going to go back out to RFP to find an architecture firm who can?
I can't speak precisely to what the RFP was, but I can tell you that the RFP did call for one design. And that design, what we're going to talk about here in the programming, is designed to meet our needs. And I think initially when that projection was made, go ahead, Chief.
Yes. I was a part of the RFP. We had, if I recall correctly, 3, maybe 4 different bids of architects that bid to do this. When we put out the RFP, we put exactly what you're talking about. Here's the budget, here's what we're looking for. And then they submit the resume with the information on what they can do. They don't give you they give you the best case scenario on the number, but they don't, what's very difficult is for them identifying we can do it for that price. I'd have to get back with Paul Woodard. He was the actual person who ran the RFP. He's the engineer contracted by the city of Fitchburg who directed the RFP process. We had input just simply on the needs of a police station. He's the engineer that knows how to run that process. The one thing about getting like good, better, best designs is each design is costing a significant amount of money to design. And these, even the ones that we didn't pick, if there's a certain amount allocated, the way I understand it, from the budget, from that $35 million, that goes into the whole architect process, city manager process, and then some. So when we're talking about whatever amount it is, $35 million, there's still an amount of that $35 million that simply goes to the architect firm and the manager. So those costs, well, I think it's told, I should have had Paul Woodard over here to give you those numbers because that's within his expertise. But there's still a percentage that comes on there. So there's really not $35 million that goes to any building. The first, I would say at least the first $5 million plus goes to these other services that require getting the process together.
Is that firm like the project, just kind of with a project management background too, there's the triangle of like time, money, and scope. Is there a project manager that comes with the architecture firm that's looking over? I would assume someone's looking at exactly what you're saying, right? Like we have 35, and the more time we spend on re-architecting everything, it eats up more cost from raw materials. Does that come with a...
There's several different bid processes. The first one is the architect. We contracted an engineer who used to be a former engineer for the city of Fitchburg. So now he's being contracted. And what's interesting is he's coming out of our police budget to pay for his services. So then we also have the construction manager, which was discussed. There was an RFP process for that as well, Pepper's Construction. And based on the bid, I'll let you know, there was only 2 bids that came in. Pepper's in another company, and Pepper's realistically, even for like a person like myself that doesn't know that process, made a lot more sense in what they were explaining. And they all give resumes and they all give you your portfolios on what they can do. But there weren't many either for the architect for the design and the architect for the construction, the construction manager. There weren't that many people that reached out, which is pretty interesting. So it's not like you have 20 different architects to choose from that says we're going to build you a police facility. What's unique about FGM, the architect firm that we did choose, is they currently are the lead in building police facilities. And what also that struck out for me is the way they utilize the space for multiple purposes, which is why we selected them. Because as you can see, we're trying to build a 20-plus year building, but if you notice, the square footage did not go up. And that's based on the things that they learn and what they're doing to keep those things down to include square footage.
So I'll just interject here real quick. So you can see here almost $2 million is budgeted for the planning and design there. So I think their bid came in around 1.5.
It's 1.5.
1.5, yeah. So I think that's where their bid came in. And additionally to the other point, to just add on a little bit here, so then Pepper Construction then does look at the escalation of costs, and that's built into this budget that we'll talk about, but they also look into the escalation of costs if there's delays, material availability and things like that. So that's what they're really overlooking. And defer to Alder Herbst here for.
I just want to add, I don't want to give you any sense of comfort, but the city engineer on this was the one that, he's been responsible for City Hall, building maintenance facility, the library, and the senior center. All has been our city engineer, on all of those projects. He retired, he's coming back, but we have the right, I think we have the right person to have the city's best interest in mind.
I agree with you. I think he's great. I 100% agree with you on that. Yes, ma'am.
So there's a couple of points that she made that I wanted to make sure that folks understand. So when there is a new design, that's on the jail project, for example, anytime we say, hey, we want to look at something different, that's a minimum of a $200,000 spend to change much of anything. Minimum of a $200,000 spend. And even though we also have really great people doing these things, it depends on who is available to bid. I mean, as we saw with the jail project, we got one bidder, and that price went up $21 million. So I don't want us to be lulled into a false sense of security that if we say this is at 35 now, that this is what that's going to stay at. My experience with looking at how these projects go is that that's not necessarily the case. And I'm going to say also that is not the fault of anybody that's going to be in this room. So I don't want people to get lulled into a false sense of security that if we say we approve this, this is how much this is going to cost, that's going to be what it costs. Construction timelines are changing. The ability and how many construction companies are available and wanting to bid. 10, 15 years ago, we would have had 7, 8, 9 architects bid for this project. Now we have 2. So the landscape is changing, and I don't want us to, as good as all of our people are in 17 different areas, we cannot change what is happening outside of us, which is the market and construction outside of that.
Thank you very much. You said that way better than we could, but it's true. I was very surprised at the level on bids. I thought we were going to receive a lot of bids. I'll be honest with you. I've been meeting different construction companies through friends of friends and friends that I know, and one thing that is very consistent is when you have a timeline, and the more you delay it, in projects this size, it's very easy to rack up delay charges that go over 7 figures. It's very easy. So I keep that in mind because we want to stay on, and that Paul Woodard, when you talk about his expertise, that's one of the reasons he really understands that, about staying on track and on the timeline with a project, because it's very easy to get those costs to move up simply because of delays. I'm not the expert, but I know by talking, that's one thing that is very consistent.
Other questions over here?
In the process so far, has there been any formal study looking at other departments, ideally of similar size in the state that have recently constructed new facilities, and kind of a comparison done to what their costs end up being, what their space needs end up being in relation to what you all are proposing for us?
So not a formal study of the current process. The comparables were looked at in some past conversations, but the Village of McFarland recently constructed a joint public safety facility, and those bids came in 2019 at around $440 a square foot, and you'll see how much that goes up. I mean, we're talking almost a 45% increase what we're dealing with here. Some other questions have come up in the past of, well, what do comparable departments have in square footage available to them? So City of Middleton, smaller population, smaller police department, they're 44,000 square feet of usable space. I don't know what their gross square footage is. That building was built in 2010. City of Verona, I don't know how much their facility costs. I can tell you they're at around 26,000 square feet, so a city that's like almost maybe with growth, a little bit more than a third of our size and probably half of our personnel. So as far as comparisons, yeah, that's been looked at, but yeah, it's a trend, and all these things that we're talking about are existent in all these current projects. Other questions? Okay. keep moving on here, going back into the programming, getting into the fun stuff here. So when FGM architects come in and start working with us to get feedback, because again, we don't want to build a cookie cutter building. No one wants a cookie cutter building just drop someplace that has to meet our needs now and in the future. They start working with us. Before we get into that though, before we start that process, we have to think about what's important to our community now and in the future. So we look at 2 key documents to inform a lot of our decision making, not only on this facility, but just how we're doing business on a daily basis. On the left is President Obama's task force on 21st century policing, which is a comprehensive look at the state of policing nationally. And I'm happy to tell you in both of these studies that we were already there in most places. We're doing a lot of the best practices, and we have a lot of pluses already. The second report here is a joint effort by the NAACP, United Way Leaders of Color collaboration. That's a partnership that's been going on for many years now to bring law enforcement leaders and community leaders together to talk about needs, talk about perspectives, and to improve public safety. That report is specifically looking at use of force incidents and how we can modify, how we can improve, how we can do better as a community. And a key component in both of those reports is officer training. They both really drive home the point of officer training. To do better, we have to train more, we have to train differently, we have to really emphasize that training. We'll talk about that quite a bit. The other key points, officer wellness. We can't expect our people to take care of our community members when they're suffering the most if they're not well themselves. And when our officers are going into the worst days of people's lives on a daily basis, do you think that might have an impact sometimes on them? So we need to make sure that our officers are taken care of. We also talk about technology, community engagement, all things that we can address through this process, including accreditation. And accreditation is a process similar in a lot of other industries, but it makes sure that law enforcement agencies meet the gold standard, primarily through policy and constantly improving policy and adhering to best practices. It's a checks and balances system, and it's an accountability buddy, really what it comes down to. We are not an accredited agency, and our current facility right now would not meet accreditation standards. We'll talk about that in depth. Programming considerations. So police facility is not an office space. It has elements that are not easily replicated in other places. There are many components that go into a police department. Patrol, the people that wear uniforms, are the most visible element, and they're the largest element of our police department. But behind patrol, we have administration, investigations. We run through training, wellness and fitness, booking, support, records, and dispatch and evidence, 2 of our larger areas when we talk about square footage. So to the question that was asked earlier, planning for the future. 2010, we'll take a look back before we take a look ahead. 2010, the city of Fitchburg, 25,000 residents, and I mentioned this the other night, but I was looking at a picture of when we became a city in 1983. I think it was 17,000 residents in 1983. So 2010, we move up to 25,000 residents. We have 44 officers, from the officer rank to chief, 17,783 square feet. Last year, with the attachment of town of Madison, we move up to 34,000 square feet. 55 sworn personnel, 17,783 square feet. Assuming a couple things here, so a growth rate of about 750 people a year, and based on the Midwest average and kind of gold standard for staffing of 1.9 officers per 1,000 residents, that would project us out to be 79 sworn personnel. Now, importantly, behind those 79 personnel are a whole team of dispatchers, record specialists, other civilian staff. So we're talking getting closer to 100 people working in this building already before we get there. And then going out to 2043, we're looking at almost 50,000 people and almost 93 sworn personnel. So you can imagine now we're well over 100 people working in that building. Does that answer your question, going back to your question on planning for future growth?
Yeah, I'd still love to see how how it compares against other places where, like, for every sworn personnel or for every population, you should plan for X amount of square feet in your.
Direct correlation to square footage, yeah. And that's challenging because every police department, every community addresses how they build facilities. Some have small facilities spread everywhere. Some, there's a whole variety of things, but it's a good question. We can look into that. So the impact of growth. So growth has a lot of impacts, some positive, some negative, and some are opportunities. So in Fitchburg, growth of the city means more sworn personnel, more professional staff, more vehicles. We have more people working, we need to get them around, more equipment, more calls for service. It means more involved investigations, like the investigations I'm talking about here. More evidence, so we need to store that evidence, sometimes for a very long time. A greater need for specialized services, and an increased need for training and community engagement. Now some of these things, all these things really are replicated on a county level because as I mentioned, Dane County is growing just as fast. So that means more police officers working in Dane County, just straight up, because every agency is going to be adding staff. It means more calls for service. And it likely means more investigations that are going to be originating in Madison but impacting Fitchburg in some way. I can't tell you of any major investigation where there's not some significant investigation that's tied to another community. And it also means a decreased availability for training facilities.
No, I just wanted to add, here's some quick correlations as far as space and needs, if I can kind of give you. And these vary a little bit. The national average, and it's not saying this is how you do it because there's several different variables. So this will take a whole class in itself to discuss when you look at what staffing should be for a city. But for example, national average per 1,000 is approximately, currently 2.4. It varies and it can go well past 2.5 per 1,000. The Midwest average is 1.9. Wisconsin mid-sized city average is 1.9. And and it varies quite differently here in Dane County. I would say the two lowest cities are the two fastest growing cities, and that's Fitchburg and Sun Prairie, where we're hovering around 1.6 per 1,000. One extra sworn accounts for what, 0.035%. So that's where you get the numbers that we're getting. But what goes into what the per 1,000, how you come up with what best fits. You can't just say because somebody has 2.5 per 1,000 in their city versus ours. It's geographical area. We have a pretty large geographic area, 35 square miles. And then it's the complexity of calls for service and the type of calls for service, and then the needs or the things that you want to implement in that city. So realistically, Fitchburg and Sun Prairie are very low. The surrounding cities are closer to 1.9, and I think Monona is 2.1% per 1,000. And they're a city, I was just looking it up, they're a city of just under 9,000, and their geographical area is under 4 miles versus our 35 miles.
Chief, you mentioned, in the presentation that some of your data was for like Midwest cities. So I'm wondering if there's, because it seems there's an assumption that if the population grows, there's going to be an influx or an increase in police incidents or whether police need to be called. And I'm wondering what's the strength of that correlation? And has research been done specifically like in this area to make a strong correlation between population growth and increase in police incidents? Because I feel like that's a somewhat specific thing depending on where you are and where you live and the demographics of the specific community. So could you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, naturally, and this is a very easy thing. As population grows, the calls for service. As the area gets denser, there's going to be more calls for service. People mistake calls for service as a thing like a shooting, a robbery, or things like that. Calls for service can just be simply property crimes, disturbances, and one of the biggest disturbance call or trouble with subject call is domestic. Domestic violence impacts all cultures. That's a common call no matter how wealthy or no matter how poor your community is. Those are consistent calls. Any jurisdiction you go to, one of their driving calls is domestic. So you're going to get these calls. Now here's the other piece is assignments that, how complex are the assignments? Fitchburg is growing with densely populated, high-level apartment complexes. Our current staffing, and it's in our plan, and I don't want to take Ned's part away from here, but we currently are staffing with vacations, holidays, sick time, we have maternity leave, we have a few officers on maternity leave, more leaving on maternity leave. For our staffing size, we can barely get 4 squads out there, sometimes 3 squads out there a day. So we have a presentation on this, but you have 4 officers in a 35 square mile area. Now you have a disturbance in an apartment complex. We have apartment complexes at over 100 units. We're going to send 1 officer there when you know there's more than 1 person that is in conflict. That's a big risk for the officer. We're going to send 2. That's 50% of your staffing out on the street on 1 call. And we have 1 supervisor. We don't have shift lieutenants. The 2 lieutenants you see here are going to be promoted to captain because we did not address the internal management and supervision needs of an organization that's growing, which we're trying to do in the upcoming referendum. So there's a lot of missing pieces in this department, a lot of things that were left unattended, untouched, and now they're impacting to the point, like Ned said here, that we have to do something about it. Because at the end, what I keep bringing it down to is risk management. If we don't have our internal oversight, if we don't have those pieces in place, then things are going to happen because, as you're going to see in the presentation, we're stepping ahead, but then you're going to see the experience levels of our officers are very low, and if there's no oversight to ensure that they're doing what they should be doing, those are recipes for disaster.
I'll just quickly add here, in the interest of time, moving on. I could take more questions here as well, but that space needs study that was conducted did look at the unique characteristics of Fitchburg in the sense of demographics of the community, socioeconomic needs, age demographics, all those types of things, to show that Fitchburg's population has different needs than, say, De Pere's population or some other communities. So hopefully that kind of provides some context and answer to your question. Yes?
And I also want to contextualize the population growth is not the issue. It is how it is that we are dealing with the problems that come with population growth, like how are we dealing with poverty, how are we dealing with housing, how are we dealing with food security. So the areas where crime is going down across our nation, it is when we are dealing with the root causes of these issues. So yes, these projections will absolutely bear true as far as crime if we are not addressing what are the root causes that create the problems when there is population growth. When you put 100 people in a space and you do not have services and you do not have employment opportunities, educational opportunities, opportunities for children to build community, for adults to build community. So those are all things that in conjunction will bring down crime rates. So there is never one answer, and I don't also want us to believe that doing this will be an answer to lower crime. Crime will continue if we do not continue to address the root causes of those.
And I certainly agree and can back that up where we're spending our times and the challenges that we're experiencing in our most intense investigations, for sure. But I can tell you, as the chief mentioned, with domestic violence affects every community. As we build more roads, it's more traffic crashes, it's more requests for traffic enforcement, it's additional needs. There are base level needs that a growing community needs. No one is suggesting that a new police department or 25 more police officers is going to automatically reduce crime, but much like your home, where you have a water heater, key utilities, insurance policies, there are things that are needed to adequately address the needs of your home, right? Your base needs. Now, you can go down in a whole nother, probably multi-week conversation about other ways that you can address the needs of a particular community. But what we're suggesting here is that to meet our base needs, to meet our staffing needs and those types of things, that this is the facility that's needed to meet those needs. Building a police facility, again, it's a purpose-built space. Planning for at least 20 years, hopefully it's a 100-year building, but we can at least meet our space needs for at least 20 plus years. It's not feasible to build half of a building. We can't build half of a holding cell or half of an evidence room. We can't build half of a dispatch center. And it is more cost efficient when we talk about spending precious dollars and recognizing that there are a variety of needs and a variety of ways that a community could choose to support the needs of that community. We think that this is the more cost efficient way to do this. So our preferred schematic design, before, if you came in here, we have some larger blueprints that you can take a look on the way out there, but that's what we're referring to when we talk about a schematic design. We have dropped to 74,000 square feet. We're talking about a need of 78,000 square feet. We'll talk on why that dropped a little bit. Spread across multiple levels. It's able to incorporate sustainability features, and it has training components. So these are all components of a high-functioning police facility, meets our current needs and anticipated needs, and it's what's needed now to attract, retain, and best train our personnel. So what does it look like? So the site sits at the northeast corner of Fishhatcher Road and Lacey Road across from the library. And it occupies this L shape down here. You can see facing Lacey Road with the main entrance off of Research Park Drive. I will address, the comments have come up that there is plans for a security fence to go around there, and this is a security fence. It's not a complete privacy fence. There is 0 barbed wire. It is not going to look like a prison. It is a contemporary fence that you would see in a lot of places that have, for a variety of reasons, liability reasons to protect their space, trespassing issues to protect their space. I'm not going to make this too exaggerated, but there have been incidents where police officers have been followed to their personal vehicles, where people have been waiting for police officers, where people record officers' personal vehicles in the parking lot. There are also individuals that want to come. If you can go on YouTube, you could entertain yourself for days with people who are First Amendment auditors and who purposely come on to public facilities, including libraries, post offices, and police departments to agitate people. There have been incidents in the past where those First Amendment auditors have been armed. There was a case where a person had thousands of rounds of automatic weapon ammunition and drove from Texas up here to do this very thing, and who knows what else they intended to do. So needless to say, we want to keep our people feeling safe. This is a building where everyone should feel safe, and the last thing we want to do is when an employee, keep in mind this is a 24-hour facility, is walking out to their car in the middle of the night after they've just arrested somebody, they don't want to have to feel like someone's going to be waiting for them. I think we can all kind of appreciate that fact, hopefully. One concern we'll talk about here is where this is positioned and kind of why. But this is a unique site that came through us through a rededication of what was previously designated as parkland from an extensive city process here. This is a rendering of the front of the police facility. You'll note that unlike our current entrance, it is open, it is welcoming, lots of glass to let light in for employees who feel like they've been working in the basement for the past 20 years, and we want to make it a prominent entrance. Another view here from Lacey and Research, and then a view from the staff parking lot area. You can see some garage doors here and the staff entrance down there in the lower left corner of the building. And then a view from the northwest, so this would be coming down Fishhatchery Road, approaching Lacey Road. And the concern that's been brought up is we don't want this to be what the public sees. Now, I can agree it would be nice to have a really nice facing area, but I'll tell you that due to some topography and some other issues, you're not necessarily going to see the parking lot coming from Fishhatchery Road in the distance and the sight lines. Repositioning the building would have had a lot of impact to the site and would have really minimized some of the features and functionality of the building. So I'd invite you, you can go online, you can see these details here, you can go out to these maps and see these details. I'm going to kind of just orient yourself right now. So the blue part up here is on the north end of the building, and this kind of sits along Lacey Road over here along the bottom part of this backwards L. And then it sits on top of this layer here, which is all parking. So it's kind of underground parking, if you will. And I'm going to walk you through this space here in just a second. So then this is the kind of the half upper layer that we'll talk about that sits on top of those other two. So what's inside? Public entry. These are pictures of current facilities that FGM has worked on, constructed. So again, a public entrance that's accessible, that's open. A unique feature here is that we have a vestibule, a secured vestibule, so if someone comes in after hours and we don't have the staff working 24 hours in this open public area, that someone can meet them safely. A person could come in here, say they're being followed, they could come in here, they could feel safe temporarily while someone comes to deal with their issue. Large public lobby. Right now, we have about 1,000 square feet of lobby space, but it's almost all a hallway. It's a long, if anyone's ever come in to our police department, there's a long hallway, and then you kind of get lost and people wander around. So this is really converting the space into a more open, welcoming space. You'll see you come into this yellow area up here, which is a public lobby. Immediately to the south of that, underneath there is the large window where our record specialists work. And those would be the primary point of interaction in this window right here. Big open glass area. Public restrooms, so these are individual public restrooms rather than men's and women's. Vending area, and you'll start to see some other components build out as we walk through. Immediately off of the public entrance is the community room, multi-purpose room. This is also part of our training component that we'll talk about. But this area can accommodate 100 people, classroom style, with a dividing door that is accessible to go through, so we could have 2 smaller rooms. These can be used for community meetings like this. They could be used for a department event, like a graduation or swearing-in ceremony. And for us, probably the most important purpose is that they can be used for training. Right now, training space is at an absolute premium. I just spent a better part of my morning trying to coordinate an upcoming event that was supposed to be planned at the Madison Training Center that has to be rescheduled. They can't find training space. So this would allow us to bring in any number of service providers and trainers, to include NAMI, to include other organizations that are providing training, like our mental health response training. Any number of training opportunities can be held here in this space. And again, 100 people. I'll also point out too that there's a small kitchenette, so if you wanted to have some sort of evening or lunch meeting, that could be held here as well. I did have a unique suggestion. Someone was talking about having weddings and revenue. So I don't think, and I mean, maybe now that we mention it, maybe people might want to have a wedding at the police department. We'll accommodate it. Right off of the training area here is a green roof that sits above our training area. And so this is another amenity that you would have accessible to you if you were to use that space. As I mentioned before, I hope I don't see most of you unless you're in that meeting room. If you do come in because you're the victim of a crime or a suspect in a crime, one of the places that we might interact with you is in the soft interview room. So I can tell you we've had any number of situations in here where we have a family with 5 children and we have toys and games that we can keep them occupied while we're dealing with the crime victim. Hard interview room is for someone that's suspected of a crime that we're bringing in. It's right off the lobby, so we don't have to bring them all the way into the facility. And then a unique feature is that we have space for our social worker. We have a meeting room and an office for our social worker. Our social worker currently is half-time. We hope that we can make that position a full-time position to provide kind of alternative police services and have benefits that are far exceeding just one person in that situation. Records area, we still have paper copies of some of our documents, and our records specialists work diligently to take the work that we do on the street and translate that into accountability in the courtroom and accessibility and transparency for the public. Dispatch Center has a whole host of unique needs in technology. Along with all that technology comes the IT space. And then our patrol area. So our officers work on the road. Their car has a ton of equipment in it. That's their mobile office. But in order to have a successful day and to do their job most efficiently, they need space to start and end their shifts. And then on top of it, as the chief mentioned, we need a couple layers of supervision to help those officers be the best officer they can be, deliver that service, high level of service that the community expects. So we have space for growth with our sergeants and space for the 3 lieutenants that the sergeant mentioned, or I'm sorry, that the chief mentioned. I'm looking at the word sergeant, that the chief mentioned there, to oversee each shift. And then some other spaces around there to help patrol officers prepare for their day. Break room. Right now, our break room literally consists of a converted coat closet in a hallway next to 2 trash cans and has a microwave and a refrigerator. That's our break room. So in order, again, we talk about officer wellness, having a space to take a break, and our officers are never really truly on break. At any time, especially when they have 4 officers working, they might have to dump their food, leave it on the table, and go out and take our call. So a break room, and also to build on teamwork and camaraderie, have some space where we can all gather. And then wellness rooms, as we stay on the topic of Gloucester wellness. We are very fortunate. We have support of our community and our police department and fire leadership, EMS. We have a joint public safety wellness team, and we really are working on prioritizing the wellness of our people. This is an extension of this. A physical extension of that wellness is having 3 spaces in this facility where an officer can go take a break for lactation purposes, whatever the need may be. They can go into these rooms, and FGM, our architects, work with people that specialize in the brain science. What is conducive to helping people feel relaxed so when they come out of there, they're better off? So there's 3 wellness rooms. This is kind of an example of what they might look like. We have a ton of equipment that officers wear that requires charging, so we need areas for charging and storing gear. Interview rooms, so now you're a suspect, you've been under arrest. These are what some interview room spaces might look like, both in that public lobby, off of that public lobby area, and in our holding area. Our Sally Port, I have to tell this story now that I started telling it, but a Sally Port, the term Sally Port is not from a lady named Sally. It's a term going back to medieval times where it was a way to protect the castle, to send attacking troops out of the castle without subjecting the castle. We're not dealing with any attacking troops here necessarily, but when we have a person in our care and custody and we're bringing them into our facility and we're going to take them out of our car and bring them into the holding area, we need a safe place and a safe way to do that. Right now, we can't drive a police car inside our building with a person in custody and get them into our booking area. So when we bring that person into the car, if we have to park outside right now in the ice and snow and we're holding that person that has their hands behind their back and they slip and fall and they fall on their face, and now there's a picture of a big bruise on their face, what do you think that means and translates to for the city as far as a potential lawsuit? And on top of that, we're not helping that person. That person needs to be held accountable, but they shouldn't have to be suffering because they slipped and fell and hurt their face. So on top of that too, the other big threat is the potential of someone running away. Right now, we can't do that. We have to walk people inside because our cars have gotten bigger and the spaces remain the same. Processing, we don't hold people in our facility for overnights or extended periods of time. We bring people into our facility for major investigations, and we bring people into our facility for OWI processing. Talking about future needs, Alder Wheeler has previously mentioned we don't know what the future is going to hold. We have to be positioned for it. There may come a time where the Dane County Jail, for whatever reason, does not necessarily take everyone that is under arrest. During the pandemic, we changed our procedures to limit jail population, and we were issuing citations after people were processed to a degree to appear in court. So this gives us the ability, if that time comes, to process someone, fingerprint them, photograph them, so we can find them later in our facility. This is an area where once someone is in our custody, they're in handcuffs, they're our responsibility. They have to be safe, okay? We also have to be safe. Indoor squad parking, essentially fancy garages. This is going to sit under the facility. It's in a space where our cars can be plugged in. We do not have electric vehicles, and frankly, with the way technology is going and police cars and the unique needs of police cars, that's a ways off. But it does give us a place where we can plug in our cars to reduce or limit the idling so that all the equipment in those mobile offices can stay charged and ready to go. And then I don't have to get out there and scrape snow and ice off. Canine storage, just some photos here. Our canine program is a great benefit to the community in a number of ways. We hope to grow that program, so they have unique equipment needs. Evidence, so we talk about collecting shell casings. When an officer comes out from their day, from their call, they have to come in, they have to put their evidence and tag it, chain of custody and keeping track of accountability. So what they do is they take that evidence, they bag it, they put it in the computer system, and then they put it in one of these lockers. In a perfect world, we have a civilian hired in the future that can then be on the other side of those lockers and either process that evidence or store it. One of the ways in which we've cut some square footage is changing the way from the original study is reducing our evidence room through the use of these space-saver storage systems. And a lot of this evidence we have to keep for a very long period of time. This is another training component we'll talk about in a second, but this is our defensive and arrest tactics. So it's a fancy way of saying like how when we have to arrest someone or how when we have to protect ourselves or take someone into custody, how we do those things. So this is a padded mat room where we can train on real life scenarios. We can train on state mandated techniques and tactics for doing those things. So it's a fancy way of a practice room, essentially, is what we're talking about. Areas, this is an area using physical force, which, by the way, we have excellent trainers in our department. Lieutenant McCarthy and Deputy Chief Leahy are excellent trainers in the use of these things, but we can always be better. We can study incidents from the past and whether they're in our department or nationally and get better. So this is a way where we can do this to minimize risk of injury to us and to the people that we're dealing with. Locker rooms. These locker rooms will empty into the fitness area, which we have as a significant element of the facility. But these locker rooms can accommodate men and women's lockers. And then we also have a universal shower and lockers down in the corner here and a universal toilet area. So that can accommodate future growth, current and future growth. Some examples of what some meeting areas, we lack these meeting areas right now to have there are multiple moving parts in a police department, what those might look like. Cubicles and office workspace for those that do work out of the police department, mainly investigators. This is a major case room. So in 2019, we had a homicide of a 17-year-old not too far from here. That investigation was really a whodunit. And so for weeks, we had outside investigators assisting our small detective bureau, and we occupied a briefing room, which is used for multiple purposes for preparing our personnel. We occupied a briefing room for months with pictures, diagrams, things that we wouldn't want to see the general public to see, or frankly other officers, because there was some intelligence in there. There were some other things that we just didn't want to bog down things. We just wanted to stay focused and have a place to work out of. So this allows for that space. And those types of incidents, also some sort of, like we're talking about these search warrants, a way to plan and manage those incidents. Armory and storage, so we have to store our ammunition that we use for training and for duty use, and we have a variety of both guns and non or less lethal weapons that we have to store, and we have to store those safely. Gun cleaning, and then we're going to talk about training. Before we do that, now's a pause for questions.
Mine sort of goes along with the last set of questions. It strikes me that with growth, there's another kind of causality. And of course, why a city grows, before I was here, I lived in New York City, there's whole different patterns. But I'd expect that people move to Fitchburg and, say, Sun Prairie because they perceive them as safe. Now that means that the people who are coming in would be largely people, you're saying, like, are unlikely to go to the police station. So one argument could be, well, the kinds of people that are growing are not going to be in so much need of services, and this is to the fire, partial response to the fire commissioner's question. But it strikes me also, as a citizen, that we all have a stake in Fitchburg. Fitchburg is probably safe for a lot of reasons, but partly the work of the police, and that therefore we all have a stake in the continuing safety of our community, the police feeling well supported, and an attractive facility. So I think that's another aspect of the correlation.
You're summarizing other parts of my presentation, so thank you. Along with that, though, too, who in here knows that at some point you're going to have to call the Fitchburg Police Department? Who knows when that's going to happen? And who knows why that's going to happen? Who knows when your house is going to catch on fire? Okay, again, going back to core fundamental services, what we're providing for insurance policies, the backbone of what city services that we need, and having those needs be appropriately scaled and ready for those times when they do come. Other questions? You both went up simultaneously. I'll defer to the gentleman on the end here. Okay, let him rip.
So I think a good acknowledgement is none of us in the room are experts in what police need to be successful and what facilities should look like. But I keep coming back to the question of, like, if in 20 years, we think the population is going to be 49,000 people, and we're going to have 93 officers, and kind of trying to make this a math problem with, is there a look-alike community that we've looked at and said, they have this population, they have this many officers, and they have the county shared facilities that Dane County has. And that's how we've determined that our facility should look like this, and why there's a return on investment for this level of investment.
Okay, so a couple pieces there, and I think where you're going with the training components with county facilities, is that probably accurate? Yeah. So I can tell you there are no county shared facilities here in Dane County. There is a Dane County Sheriff's Office Training Center that is a collaboration with the Air National Guard, and they are under zero obligation, we'll talk about that in a second, to allow us to train there. So as far as to answer your question though, specifically as, I don't know that we've found comparables.
Like how big were the other ones you showed? You showed other things that I forget, the architecture company had already built. Mm-hmm. How big were those cities? Were they twice our size? Were they 3 times our, or were they roughly?
So a couple of the departments that we toured and other officials in the room have toured are Mount Prospect population-wise, off the jump.
So one of the facilities that a group of individuals visited was Skokie, Illinois Police Department. There were roughly 90 officers and roughly 75 to 80,000 square feet. So they are comparable to where we're going to be. We have to understand that this is not a project for now, the 55 officers that we have now. This is for 20 to 30 years down the road. And instead of building a 40,000 square foot facility now, waiting 10 years, adding additional costs to the same building at a much higher overall cost of construction, because prices, when's the last time prices went down for a significant period of time? Now, granted, inflation hopefully is not going to be the same that it had been from 2020 to now, and it might increase at a lower rate, but it's still going to go up. So do we want to, as a community, do this right the first time, sustain us, the police department and the community and City Hall needs for 20 to 30 years, or do we want to return to this conversation in 10 to 15 years? Is also a portion of that conversation.
Just to add on to that, comparables, just to throw it out, because we are following, a lot of this is best practice. We're not reinventing the wheel. So when we're looking at this, currently the size cities, we use Wisconsin mid-sized cities. And I have a list of them that we use to compare best practices for sworn staff. And again, there's a lot of data goes in there. Now, for police facilities for our size, there's not one currently that was built in the recent years. Oconomowoc was the most recent, but they're a city of less than 25,000. So it's a smaller facility, but they still have the same components, and it fits the size of that city. We went to Illinois because those were the biggest, the closest and most recently built police departments that match the size of Fitchburg. St. Charles, Mount Vernon, and Skokie, Illinois were the 3 cities that FGM Architect used to work off of as a comparison for the new police station here at Fitchburg.
So this new police station is not, if these are double the size of, or if these match the 49,000 that we're looking at in 20 years, the police station proposal is not any bigger than the ones they currently have. Is that a fair statement?
Correct. They're proportionate, yes, because one was 75,000, one was 84,000 square feet. So they're all in that ballpark. They're not the exact same square footage, but they're in the ballpark.
Other questions on components or what's inside? Yes.
So as the population of the city grows, right now we have a half-time social worker, obviously full-time would be ideal, but it seems like in the schematics there's only space for 1 social worker. I have to imagine that as the population grows we might have 2 or 3. Was there consideration about accommodating space for that?
There is consideration. I don't know that it would be right adjacent to there. I think the first step there would probably be modifying that conference room as we've done, and that's what's happened in our current facility. As we have grown, we have basically eaten up our conference room space to have more office space, so it becomes inefficient space. And so I think there is space that's available there. There is some space for Fact TV at our friends at Fact TV in case they're going to film something in our training area or meeting room that they could grow and expand into that area.
There's also offices throughout the building that we've anticipated for future positions, strictly a finance employee or a training and standards employee, that if we are needing to modify some of those requests and some of those needs based upon not only the department but also the community, we can modify those spaces as we see fit.
Other questions?
I'm looking at those slides that we were looking at, and there's something in the evidence processing room that has references to fentanyl-related deaths. I was wondering if you could expand on how this facility will be able to accommodate training and information for overdose risks.
Yeah, so that multi-purpose training space can train anybody. It can train community partners. It can bring in regular meetings to address the opioid crisis, fentanyl. There's a whole, any organization that's out there can come train us, or we can train with them. Specifically in the evidence processing, we're talking about these very expensive but very necessary fume hoods. Yesterday, we seized a significant amount of questionable powder substance in our search warrants that had to be tested. And we have to have 2 officers down there at any given time in case one of the officers that's primarily handling it is exposed to fentanyl and has negative impacts. So these hoods, these expensive fume hoods, and the space to use them allow us to safely test those substances. Does that answer your question?
Is it common for officers to be encounter problems when exposed to fentanyl?
In full disclosure, I think some of the risk has been exaggerated, but do we really want to take an unknown powder that people are ingesting for drugs that we want to expose them to that risk? We're all about risk mitigation and reducing risk in this facility.
I just want to add, we talk about part-time social worker. She's shared part-time with the police department, part-time with the senior center. So it's not someone who we just have on the staff, 50%. She's full-time with the city.
And sorry, not to keep pushing this point, but the question I asked earlier, Mount Prospect has a population of 55,000, and Skokie has a population of 66,000. So I guess I'm a little confused because that's much bigger than where we are anticipated to be in 20 years. So if we're building the same size as Skokie and Mount Prospect, just based on the numbers, it seems like we're building too big. Okay. So can you address?
To answer your original question, I don't think there's a direct square footage requirement. They're looking at, they have things like a full-time tactical team. They have other elements that are different. There are unique nuances to all these different places and communities and the services that they offer. The other point is we're projecting out 20 years. As I mentioned, hopefully if constructed correctly, this facility lasts us much longer than that. So hopefully we're delaying the next time we have to have this round of meetings, right? So yes, of course, we want to be appropriate in size and scope and all those things and get the number right on, but we don't know how policing is going to change. We don't know how technology needs are going to change. We don't know how the community is going to change, but we're trying to be prepared and be flexible and get way more than 20 years out of this building.
I just want to add on that question is FGM interviews us. We use the space needs studies, and we're working on the square footage with them. They're the ones that design those buildings. We're working off of the projections, but we're not the experts to say it has to be this many square feet. The one thing I will tell you is FGM will be here on Tuesday at City Hall, and they're going to be there to answer these particular questions, but they do have algorithms that come up with these things. And simply, like I stated earlier, currently when they put in their design, we need a jail for 4. That's based on our information. What's the average number of people we're bringing in? What type of investigations are we having? What are we requiring for these rooms? When we explain what we have now in the projections, then they put on the design, well, that looks like you're going to need 4 cells versus 2 cells. When we talk about dispatch room, we currently only have 1 dispatch station, correct? 2. 2 dispatch stations. Well, they're looking with the growth. Well, that looks like you're going to need the room for 4 stations. And they come up with the square footage that answers for those 4 stations. When we look at an assembly area for roll call, how many officers are going to be needed to fit in that roll call? 20 years from now, that roll call space should accommodate X amount of officers for roll call on these days. Then that room is designed to fit the needs. So that's how the square footage comes up. The other piece where square footage is accounted for is in parking. So some of that money goes into the vehicle squads. A lot of the square footage that you see, a good portion, what is that? 17,000 square feet, but I don't know if that's a third or a half of the entire design is for the parking alone, for the vehicles. So if you're looking at just square footage is going to cloud what the purpose of each station within that building are. And they would be better at explaining that than we would be. We tell you the areas that we need. We need a jail. We need a communication center. We need an assembly. We need an investigations area. We need an area for administration to be able to communicate internal information that's not going to be exposed to the others. We need these areas, or we need a social worker area. That's interview rooms, soft interview, hard interview rooms, and they come up with the square footage and where to place it in the design.
And I was told never to correct my chief, especially in public, but I just want to catch it. We don't have a jail. It's a holding area. Before I have you ask your question, Alder Gerhardt, not to put you on the spot, but we went on a tour of the Midtown Police Station together for Madison Police Department, right? Yeah. Remember that? And do you remember Captain Jason Friedman took us on that tour, and do you remember what one of the first things he said when he was talking about shelling out spaces and additional growth? They totally ran out of space way before they anticipated. Again, we can't predict what our needs are going to be or how policing may change or things like that. And so, trying to be, with respect, again, to financing, but trying to be very scientific and precise is a challenge. And so one of the reasons why we don't want that cookie cutter space is we want to be able to be appropriate. Go ahead.
Just throwing something out in response to Nicole's question. I know you mentioned that other communities don't just have one place, they have multiple places. If growth happens in 20 years that was bigger than we thought it would be, would a precinct be out of the question as a possibility, just given the size of...
Yeah, depending on our needs, yeah, but we're talking, yeah. I was just going to say, so yeah, it could be a possibility. And certainly, but then we're looking at things that might be more realistic, like being a partner with a current existing space to have a presence, to have an office where officers can do their work. We're talking probably a much larger community. Sun Prairie does have that model, and you talk to any officer there, they despise it, because if they're stuck working out of this district or this precinct, then they have less contact with other people, they have to drive further to do certain things. But we could increase our presence and accommodate needs throughout future spaces if we get probably much, much higher in population. It would probably be an efficient way to do that.
And just to give you an idea about building extra police stations, there's always going to be, if you're building more police stations, let's just talk about Milwaukee. They have 7 districts, a city that initially in the 1970s, when those 7 districts were all up and running, that's just under 800,000 residents. And each district housed roughly around 100,000 residents. So when if you look at district, I look at these cities outside of Madison as more like a district, size of a district station. This is going to be your police station. The municipalities outside of the city of Milwaukee, your West Allis, your Oak Creek, your Brown Deer, they're one station. If you grow, just to give you an estimate, for Fitchburg to think about an additional station or substation, you would have to grow roughly start getting at that 100,000 resident. So you see how far away you are from that. And if you were, based on my experience and what I've seen, I would much rather have the one station, your headquarters, and a smaller community substation closer to some of your areas where you want to be more visibly seen. Racine calls them cop houses. Those are community rooms. I call them more community spaces because those areas, when you reach out and the city grows, and there's 35 square miles, 34 square miles here, you would want, in my opinion, you'd want to consider more city services, DPW, health inspectors, those type of areas where they don't always have to come back to City Hall, but there's an area where they can do some of their correspondence, and it impacts that particular neighborhood that you want to see presence. So those are things that will have to be decided when the city grows that far. We're nowhere near 100,000 yet. We have to look at what build an initial in their first in the history standalone before you start thinking another station, and that's a long ways away.
And I guess I'll point out here real quick too, in thinking about schools, school districts and building new schools, talking about building those appropriately, there's a beautiful school in Fitchburg, Forest Edge Elementary. It's won all sorts of awards for its design. From what I'm hearing, they're already at capacity, and that facility has been there for just a short period of time. And so again, we talk about when we're spending big money and dollars for school districts and things like that, or for school buildings and like that, and planning for the future, again, changing dynamics, you don't know how quickly a neighborhood develops and things like that. And so what is more cost efficient over time? Having that extra space to grow into, and it's built one time and it has all these components that we need, those are all things that are to be considered. I don't know what the correct answer is there.
Yeah, so Chief, you said we wouldn't think about a second facility until we hit like the 100,000 mark. We've got multiple fire stations. How does the police differ from fire?
I'll just take that. Yeah, so a police department and a fire station, okay? The fire trucks are not driving around 24/7. If we'll notice too, they're parked inside, they have indoor parking, and they're ready to go at any second. Fire departments, response time is critical. Our fire department's response time is directly correlated to the insurance that you all pay on your homeowner's insurance. And so you want when a fire is out of control, you want the fire department to be strategically located to provide correct response times. That's one of the reasons, and those are smaller footprints spread across the city. Those are using similar designs because, again, they have one primary core function. Fire chief isn't here, so I can say they have one core function. But that's one of the reasons, one of the main reasons as far as being strategically positioned. You go to any community and there's not just one central fire department, right? There's all sorts of different fire departments. Other questions that were out there? Yes.
Yes. So my question goes on to the spacing that you were talking about in the rooms. So we kind of were talking a little bit before about root causes of crime and rises in crime. Outside of just like shootings and stuff, but poverty, that stuff does impact domestic violence and stuff like that. But how do we see where partnerships with organizations within Fitchburg or different things that used to be a part of policing like CAIS and stuff like that, where would that be and how would that be incorporated in this space? Would that be with the social work or would that be in the schools?
Primarily if you want to have the one-on-one meetings, we have this conference space in here with a social worker. We can accommodate large groups and trainings and collaborations, things like the United Way, leadership meetings, a whole host of things to bring people local because, right now we are very dependent on jumping onto things with the city of Madison, right? We want to be a part of the city of Madison. We're growing, all communities are growing. Eventually, we're going to have issues and things that are unique to Fitchburg, and having the space to collaborate and do those things, bring in resource fairs, bring in a variety of things into these spaces, and trainings, all sorts of different ways to collaborate would be the primary place to do that.
And what public transportation or bus line goes to this location?
I will defer to the experts in the room from the council that are talking about that conversation. And I can tell you right now that it's limited, will suffice to say.
So right now the bus stops at Key Road. There have been discussions as we plan the referendum for next year. Some alders have suggested, including myself, in meetings that, as the bus rapid transit is built down Fish Hatchery Road, that there could be built out a portion that goes all the way to City Hall. Because right now, if you don't have a car, you can't get to City Hall.
In full disclosure, though, ideally, we are going to where those community groups are already meeting. We're not really focusing. We have the ability to host those meetings, and it would be great to show people, hey, this is the police department, and this is a place where the public is welcome. But ideally, we're going out to those places as well.
How would you see that? So I'm coming from the former town of Madison area that is now y'all, Fitchburg. So I'm working for the Badge Rock Neighborhood Center. So a lot of the people in that utilize the neighborhood center kind of don't even really notice that there has been a shift when it comes to their day-to-day lives, that this is now Fitchburg and that this is no longer Madison. And even like with the students and youth that use the space, I'm telling them, like, you see the sign has moved up to right down the street. This is now Fitchburg. So how is that population being incorporated into this stuff, and how will they be able to utilize these services?
Well, ideally, in addition to this facility, we're also addressing our staffing, and to include neighborhood officers that are specifically focused on the ability of working solely with neighborhoods and not having to take calls for service. We recently were awarded a grant by the U.S. Department of Justice to add 5 police officer positions, which will help grow that program so that we can be mobile, so that we can have those interactions, we can have those connections, again, in spaces native to those groups where they're comfortable. But again, as far as the facility, as I mentioned before, this facility isn't going to go out and solve problems. It's not going to respond to calls for service, but it does address the needs of our police department to ensure those people that are going out there are able to perform those services efficiently and effectively. I'll take your question or comment here. We just have a whole chunk of information to move through here, so go ahead.
And I don't know if this is the right time, whenever it is that you can fit this in. I know that we gave a lot of money for the CARES program to expand to our rural communities like Fitchburg. How much have you integrated that work? Because then that brings out fire departments and social workers to spaces that are more mental health challenges, and saves you all the time and the space to be in places that are inappropriate for you to be in. So I don't know if that fits in right here, just that's something that I would like to know as a general, how it is that you all are integrating.
It's an evolving conversation. We are actively participating with the City of Madison, talking about a whole host of different options and opportunities. I don't necessarily know that it's a apples to apples comparison as to what goes on in Madison. Again, addressing the unique needs and looking at other partnership opportunities. But that's certainly at the top of mind.
Can I add something?
Yes.
So we are talking with the City of Madison. The City of Madison is putting together a plan of how they are going to share those resources, or working with other municipality. So because they are going to be kind of like leading the project, and then the municipalities surrounding Madison, we should be contract with them. So they are putting together the plan, so we don't know that. But I already met with the City of Madison mayor to talk about CARES program. And also we are looking at our data too, I talked to Chief Morale and Ned, collecting some of the data to determine where are the areas in Fitchburg that maybe we need to have that, those services. So, so we are talking about that.
I just want to make it clear here too throughout this presentation, we are completely understanding of the financial situation that the city is, and that the challenges that we are in our community every single day. We go into more households on a daily basis than anyone else has the experience of going into, right? We see the challenges, we see the needs, we see the different ways to approach a solution. Again, our situation, we are dealing, what we're talking about here is the base of operations in order to effectively do those things. We understand, we don't know how things are going to change, how our calls for service, our culture of what we're, as a society, how we're addressing these challenges. We don't know how that's going to change, but we think this is, right now, meets our needs and will meet our future needs. I have to jump into training here, and I want to preface this conversation on training because it's an area where there's been a lot of conversation, and I have to start out by saying that we are very fortunate in the city. We have a very robust training budget that allows officers and all of our personnel to attend training, a variety of types of training across a number of subjects, and that is supported by our council. And so we are very appreciative of that. Our officers, I would put them against any officer already in the area, and certainly in Wisconsin on the national level, are very highly trained. We want to talk about how we can make that better. How many people watch the nightly news and see this headline on a regular basis? That's what we want to get to, but that's not going to catch a whole lot of attention, right? How many people instead have images like this that resonate with them when things go horribly wrong in Uvalde. Lives are lost. Officers waited. This is what we're talking about addressing. This is what we're talking about improving here. We want our officers to have every bit of confidence and competence in the world to provide the best level of service for our community. I'm going to tie in exactly how this works in with one of our components of our training center, and that being a training bay that's going to look like this, that allows us to train on this. Okay? So you can set up this scenario where there's a door, and you have a team of people, and on the other side of that door, you hear gunshots. Real gunshots, not just a sound, not just a video, not a video game. You hear real gunshots. And you have a door, you're wearing your real weapons, your real gear, the heavy stuff. This is playing with pads for football fans out there. This isn't just running through drills. This is playing with pads. You have real gunfire in a safe and controlled environment, and you have that door, and a group of officers are confronted with a situation where they hear that noise on the other side. They go in, and they're presented with a paper target of a person pointing a gun at them. They are lawfully able to shoot their weapon to neutralize that threat. Not to kill that person, to stop the threat. They want to stop the act of killing. So they are stopping that threat. But around that target, there's a bunch of pictures, and I'm not going to call them targets, but they're able to be targets so the officers can see where their rounds go. There's a bunch of pictures of school children and teachers. So an officer goes in there and they address the situation as they're trained. Every time an officer fires their gun, they're responsible for that round that leaves. They can't recall that. You can't recall that, right? So do you as a community, if we're responding to this threat, expect that an officer is going to be proficient enough to, when the time comes, to protect themselves or to others, has the training in a real-life stressful scenario as close as it can possibly be, not just a video game, or not just a simulation where I'm holding a plastic gun that doesn't have recoil and things like that, that doesn't do other things that you don't suspect when your heart rate's up. What do you want? Do you want that person to be capable of delivering what they need to deliver in that moment to stop that incident? Now, building on this further, now you have that same door, and they go through that door, they hear the gunshots, you can add screaming, you can add smoke, you can make it as realistic as possible, because in this environment you can turn the lights off, you can do a whole host of things. Now they come through that door after they're hearing gunshots, and for 4 other times, they've gone through that same scenario where they're shooting a bad guy with a gun pointed at them. Now they go through that door, and that target, that first thing that they see right there is a small school child that's holding something completely, that's not a weapon. So now you are training, not only are you training the proficiency and the accuracy of working with the tools, you are training that officer to think critically, and to think critically faster. There are a lot of professions out there that have the luxury of time and of working on some things and addressing them. There are a lot of professions that are out there, and law enforcement, policing is one of them, where in a matter of seconds, a police officer's life can change, the persons that we're dealing with can change, and the entire community or world can change. So this is what we're talking about. We are talking about making our officers the best that they can possibly be to best serve the community in a way that is needed. So again, this is part of the training component, a tactical, multi-purpose tactical training bay. An officer can go in this component at any time, really, rather than having to wait, and we're going to talk about that in a second. They can work with their less lethal tools, they can work with their firearms, or they can go in there equipped with those weapons or tools and realize that they don't have to use them. They can work on de-escalation, they can work on problem solving, they can work on making themselves better in communication, still realizing, though, that they have the ability to use those things or to transition to those different tools. So this is a space that allows us to recreate environments. Because of where it's located in the facility, you can drive a car in there. Unfortunately, a number of officers are killed or assaulted while they're sitting in their cars, or they're responding so quickly to a situation where they have to learn to shoot from their car. Do you want us to wait when we're coming to your emergency and someone's shooting? So this is what this environment allows us to do. There is currently one space in the area, the immediate area, that's even feasible for us to do that. So multi-purpose and training and community rooms. So this is a space to your question where we can collaborate, where we can bring in outside entities to train us, where we can learn from others. It can also allow us to bring in and host training, so that's a cost savings. Defensive tactics room is the room with the pads. So this is before you get necessarily to the use of the real weapons, but you're training on a technique to take someone that's resisting you into custody safely to minimize the risk of injury to yourself or others. And then again, this multi-purpose tactical training bay. So this training bay is creating a game time environment, the real equipment, without the direct competition. And it is a safe way, a place where an officer can make mistakes without having to impact the community or themselves or others. So again, only 2 locations, and I didn't mean to be too abrupt with my response to your question, but there are no shared facilities in Dane County. There is a facility that's open for us to use, but to the point that that facility now, due to the challenges of getting their recruits through other academies, has basically built their own law enforcement academy, taking a lot of space at the Dane County range to maximize their time rather than having to drive to other locations to drive or to shoot or to do the other things that the state mandates we do. So those 2 locations are the Madison Police Department and the Dane County Sheriff's Office training range. Madison PD, again, is the only indoor facility. 2/3 of our department works in hours of darkness. The only place that we can simulate working in hours of darkness is the Madison PD training facility, where again, you can turn the lights out, you can park a police car with flashing lights, you can teach people how to use their flashlights. So you can discern what that object is in someone's hand before you make a critical decision that could change your life or someone else's. Defensive tactics room, we talked about there. Next closest option would be Fort McCoy in Toma. That's a few hours away. A few hours that we're paying people not only to travel there and to stay there, but also those are a few hours that we're not having that police service in the city. Our instructors have to coordinate 20 days a year, so that's 20 days where our personnel, sometimes at a cost of thousands of dollars of overtime to backfill that personnel, are leaving the city of Fitchburg to go to these other locations. We have 4 days of training that are mandatory minimum requirements, or just above the mandatory minimum requirements. This is an inefficient use of time and travel and downtime, and that all translates to money. Our outside agencies, as I mentioned, are under zero obligation to host us. We are at capacity already, I think, at these other facilities, and we were trying to host this meeting coming up at the Madison range. It's out of service. They had some mechanical issues. So that facility is no longer able to host us. We've had recent recruits that we have to qualify on their handguns, and they've canceled our range time. It's just like ice time if you're any hockey parents that are out there and have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go and get your kids onto the rink. It's the same situation. Now let's talk about why this is critically important to us and why this is more important than ever. The average officer goes to a 720-hour law enforcement academy training. And those academies are held throughout the state, mostly at technical colleges. Less than 20% of that time is spent on tactics, including the use of firearms and defense and arrest tactics. So for those individuals, and there are more and more of them that have never handled a weapon, we're going to teach them in less than 60 hours how to not only handle a weapon, but to make really smart choices with them. And as I mentioned, we have 4 training dates throughout the year. That's 8 hours a day, but really what that translates down to is probably about maybe 5 hours of training, because we have to pay our people time to drive to Wanakee to the Dane County range and back. And we have to have downtime because there's limited space for them to train. They train on their firearm 3 times a year, so of those 32 hours, less than half of that is spent working with their firearm, and they qualify once a year. Now this is why this is critically important. The average officer in the city of Fitchburg right now has approximately 4 years of experience. If you go home tonight at 7 p.m. and call the Fitchburg Police Department, chances are that the officer that responds there is going to have less than 3 years of experience. Now again, our people are very well trained, and I'd put them up against others. But we can't account for the changing dynamics that are out there in our community and what the challenges that they're facing on a daily basis. Some of these rounds Some of these rounds here are fired. The trend that we're seeing right now are guns that have a modification to them that allow them to shoot 30 rounds in less than the time it just took me to say 30 rounds. So things are changing. It's a dangerous environment for our officers. There's a variety of things that are impacting the situation that our officers are going into. So I'm going to kind of summarize this here. Who do you want responding to your house? Do you want the officer that meets the bare minimum standards? Put yourself in the position of a son, daughter, family member that's having a mental health crisis and they've gone armed. Now your neighbor has to call the police. Who do you want responding? Do you want the officer that's trained, competent, and confident in their decision making and knows that they can use a weapon, or more importantly, that they've trained enough that they can recognize the appropriate threat or lack of threat and de-escalate the situation? Now, some focus has been on the cost of this training component and who should bear the cost of this training component. When police scenarios and situations go wrong, that cost is not going to be spread across Dane County. It might be if there's civil unrest and places and buildings burn, but this incident, I think most people remember, going back a couple years, in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, an officer pulled over an individual, and during the course of that interaction, they went to deploy their less lethal device, a taser, and ended up using a firearm. This settlement here is on the really low end of law enforcement use of force settlements. That individual was killed because the officer, in a stressful situation, no intent, in a stressful situation, mistook one of her weapons and used a firearm instead. Right there, $3.25 million. That's not cost that's going to be spread by anybody else when this happens in a community. So we are talking about investing in our community and our people to prevent loss like this, loss of life and loss of money. And on top of that, the officer, her life is forever changed too. Our people go into situations in a matter of seconds, again, seconds. Most police officer-involved shootings happen in less than 3 seconds and very close. We're not talking about pinpoint accuracy. We're talking, Deputy Chief Leahy and I are talking, and all of a sudden he decides that now's the time, and his reaction is going to probably be a lot faster than mine. I don't have time to talk.
Is that my cue, Ned?
That is your cue.
Grab some water. Great. Here is my position. Being the chief of police, I have to look at things through risk mitigation. All right, what are the risks? So we're stuck on training, all right? But I'm going to tell you this about training. When we keep saying Fitchburg is one of the fastest growing cities, if not the fastest growing city in Dane County, that means we now have to start accepting it and owning it. Otherwise, let's stop raising new buildings, new properties, if we're not going to be able to accommodate that. We have to own it. There's a reason why there's a training facility in Madison. That's because it's the city of Madison, and they have to accommodate the needs of the city of Madison Police Department. The training needs of the county, Dane County sheriffs is for Dane County sheriffs. Now, us as leaders, law enforcement leaders, whether you're a sheriff, chief of Madison, chief of any of the other departments, the relationships are great. But at the end of the day, our responsibilities are to our municipalities or for the sheriff, the county. That's what our obligation is. My obligation is to do the best for the city of Fitchburg. And the resources are getting scarcer and more scarce and more scarce. How are we going to stay above water and handle things? The days that these are happening, you should know that when we're collecting these, and there was just a recent person shot at a tavern within the last, before New Year's. That requires mutual aid because, as we stated, we only have 3 or 4 officers out on the streets. And you should know, not in Fitchburg, but you should know that in some of our surrounding jurisdictions, there's nights when there is not a supervisor out on the street, but an officer with less than 3 years out. If there were a pursuit and that officer pursues somebody, just think of something as simple as what you've seen in the news, and there's an accident, there's fatalities, it's quick to blame that police officer. Very quick to blame that police officer. But the level of people that we're hiring are young, 21, 22-year-old adults. And everybody that I'm seeing here, we all have some good life experiences. Now, are we setting them up for failure? Or are we setting them up for success? Because I'm going to tell you some of the things that I can say I can do. But I also have 30 years in law enforcement. When we talk about use of deadly force or being involved in critical incidents, I could say, I've been involved in them, I've investigated them, I managed them. I looked at them through the internal affairs lens, and as a chief of police, I oversaw them, and I also looked at ways where we developed critical incident review boards where you look at these incidents and then indicate, were we within policy? Did the officers act within training? Did our equipment operate properly? Was there adequate supervision? And is there anything that we could have done differently? Out of all the national events that you've seen, and even some of the cities where there's been a consent decree, supervision, adequate training, right? And you look at your policies. So if we're looking at we want a department so young, and after 2020, the majority of your experience left the profession. Every police department in our nation, the majority, I would say more than 85% of the jurisdictions are struggling with hiring, retention, and then building the staff. So I can tell you, I commend these three here. And I commend them because I came from a place where I could not sleep. I worked so hard. Fitchburg, at least we can sleep. But they've been burning the midnight candle working 16 hours plus to accommodate this piece. And we all still have a department to run. The sergeant today, when I walked in to prepare for an event that I went to before this, I asked him, how are the streets? What's going on the streets? He goes, I haven't got out there. I got to work on our property. I'm working on property. And he kind of chuckled. He goes, you should see it's a mess down there. That's a risk in itself. We can lose a serious case by that. And then who gets sued? So for training, I'm going to run a scenario past you, a real life scenario, and what the needs of training are for. The world that I came from, officer-involved shootings, incidents happen quite frequently. In fact, in one city alone, you could have 16 officer-involved shootings, 22 overall critical incidents where somebody dies in police custody. So quite frequently, and the one that particularly strikes me, the officer had a little over a year, and that includes police academy time, so about 8 months on the street. That officer, the other one had a full year on the streets. And they respond, the dispatcher calls them, says, respond to a report of shots fired at such incident. So on those, you're going to put on the red lights and siren on your vehicle. And when you put on the red lights and siren on the vehicle, body cam comes on, squad cam comes on. So this is all on body cam. We saw all of everything that happened of what I'm telling you. So those two officers are responding. The dispatcher keeps giving updates. Okay, the subject just got into a vehicle, ran into the building. Shots are still being fired. Okay, they get there. Now they're parked on the other side of the building. They get out. As they open the door, they hear the shots being fired, and you can hear that on the mic, right? And as soon as they hear that, what is the audience hearing from the body cam? Now they're jogging to around the corner. When they get around the corner, you can see the vehicle. The vehicle's revving, because now the tires are squealing, but it's struck the building, so it's not moving. And the person in the vehicle that is suspected of shooting is sitting in there, all on camera. What do you think the officers say when they now interact with that person? put the motherfucking gun down, I'm gonna blow your shit, all of the swear words come out. And this person looks up, points a gun at them, and shoots. They shoot back, strike him, and he dies. In court, in the district attorneys, that was privileged use of force by the police officers. Nothing, those officers now they have to undergo psychological, they have to answer to the internal affairs part, the criminal internal affairs investigation. It's a long drawn out process, all right? And they make it through. Now I look at that through many different lenses. They did everything right. But what if we can control that? What if we could train in ways to communicate, tactical negotiations? I call it crisis negotiations. And now that officer goes around that corner. They did everything tactically right, but now they say, Officer Morales, Fitchburg Police, are you okay? Could that maybe have struck a different response from this person who was either, I don't remember if he was under some type of drug or if he was suffering from some type of mental health. But what if it would have struck a different response? Where now he's like, who's talking to me? And now we get into a type of negotiations and get him to surrender the gun. So when we talk about scenarios, those are the type of scenarios we're talking about. There's SWAT teams in this state that pride themselves on taking people into custody without using force. Not on using force. But if you don't train, you can't control your heart rate. We're waiting for the update on the Badger game. Who's shooting the free throw? Right?
Badgers are up.
Okay, Badgers are up. Because when I'm shooting that free throw, who is that person that's shooting the free throw? They're controlling their breathing. Take a couple of dribbles. Gather their thoughts. Alderman Dantzler, and shoot the free throw, right? What are you doing there? What are you doing there? And that's no different in law enforcement. I'll give you another piece. Who are we hiring? I told you we're hiring young people in this workforce. Where is their life experiences? And are they, have they interacted with other cultures? Where are we getting them from? Are they from up north Wisconsin, maybe never even seen a Hispanic or a black person or an Asian person? And now when they see somebody that they've never seen before in their life, how do we expect them to interact? We're all human beings. We all learn different things. I would love to have that opportunity to train. History repeats itself. In 1993, we went through the same things when I came on the job in law enforcement that we are now. What were some of the primary things that I had to learn at the academy? Culture diversity. We had different communities talk about their interaction. And it helped us understand how we interact with them. I'm going to tell you right now, with the level of experience that we have in law enforcement, I want to have different pieces there. We look at firearms thing, and they think that all we want to do is shoot. We look at the DAT room, and everybody thinks all we're going to do is box. A lot of this that I want to do with us and the experience I want to bring is 25 years of things that are in here and try to compact it in there as much as possible so that we don't keep making the same mistakes that hit national news. And that's going to take interaction from all of us to train and bring up other trainings and bring other groups. Bring Mr. Jones in here to come in. What is NAACP? You show videos.
I'm ready to throw my questions out at you. I've been sitting here waiting to ask my questions.
Right, to bring those things, yes.
First question. The reduction from 78,000 square to 74 is a $4,000 square foot reduction. Can you recall exactly where that's occurring and why? And did it have an impact on the RFP that was first submitted? Because if I heard you correctly, that first RFP was for 78,000 square. So did that reduce the cost in some fashion?
So, yes, we'll cover that. The 4,000 square foot or 4,000 square foot reduction is was based early on our recognition that we're dealing with some costs, right? So we were looking at reducing, that was a reduction primarily of parking spaces, and then condensing some of our evidence, indoor parking, and condensing some of our evidence storage area.
But none of the other service areas in terms of training and
Because again,
records collection and so on. 'Cause right now, we have a big issue with police records being retained correctly according to DOJ, so I hope we're in compliance with that state requirement. Second question has to do more with, we've been talking CIP. Let's talk operational. What unit of the city government is now going to take this data, take these projections that you've come up with for cost, put them in play, and show me some time trend as to what the potential cost is going to be going forward? And then, remember, I had another question coming back to you. Go with that one.
Okay. What was that? So, we're going to cover the financial impact. We are at the end time of our presentation. Chief Morales could be here talking about training for the next probably 5 or 6 days, but we'd all need food and water and a few breaks in between, and a lot of food, water, and breaks in between.
So you're holding your question for at the end for me? Okay.
Yep. So we'll talk about the financial impact. If you want to answer your question, ask your question now, and then we're going to...
Oh, you're coming to that.
Yep.
Well, the other question for you is this. When Fitchburg alders, city council, agreed to approve a civilian oversight committee, and we're coming to that, where would that committee fit in this design? How would it be implemented? How do you see it working?
A civilian oversight committee for the police only or for other entities?
Civilian oversight committee.
Well, if we had our building, we'd accommodate a lot there, especially within our training to go actually be a part of our training. And that's where we talk about, that's what I'm talking about, NAACP, any of the other groups that question police tactics. Well, let's not only just talk about them, why don't we sit down and actually play some of them out? You know what I mean? And that would be a part of the training. I would like to bring, as I stated, when you're hiring young adults with very little life experiences, we have to find other ways to expose them to what they're going to be seeing out there on the street. And I would be hoping that we have these opportunities where we can come up with ideas, because you might come up with something that we never thought of. And say, how about if we do this? It works. Well, now we got an area to implement it. So that's where I see it working. That's where I see these places. And even the range. I mean, we have, and I know I'm saying it wrong because everything I say is different according to Fitchburg, but we have a Citizens Academy. We had it. It's been postponed since 2020 because of the COVID. But those are things that we want to bring back. And when I say that, it doesn't just impact our community, our citizens that take these classes, but that would also help come up with ideas on what kind of training we could expose our officers to.
So I'm gonna ask you to hold your questions here so we can cover the financial impact, because that's where we want to get. I'll be here. I'll stand outside in the parking lot after and answer all your questions if that's what it takes. Financial impact, we'll just rip the Band-Aid off. The design quote that came in, the estimate that came in, $49.2 million. That includes $2.5 million for sustainability. It includes $2.8 million for interior furnishings, fixtures, and equipment, and a 5.7 escalator for contingency and escalation in there. Sustainability, it's rightly at top of mind for a lot of people. It's good on a number of levels. There's a challenge here. This is a 24-hour facility. This is not something that shuts down to save a whole bunch of energy overnight. That $2.5 million is going to get us a menu of options that is under consideration by those that are experts. We're experts in policing and what we need. We're going to leave some of these choices to the experts in sustainability and appointed or elected officials to make those decisions there. I'm not going to get too far into that, but there are a variety of options. We're building a brand new building, so we have the ability to take advantage of what we know about past experiences with city projects and best practices, financial rebates, things like that, all of those factors that are out there. Going back to a question that was out here earlier, 2015 study that looked at future needs and a whole host of things here. That $25 million, I think that was your question over here where that came up with. That came up with square footage needs, a whole host of things. Came up around $25 million. In 2024 dollars, that's $37 million alone right there. We talk about escalation and inflation and things like that. This number did not include sustainability for that $25 million. It did not include furnishings, fixtures, and equipment, so the inside. So there are a whole host of things that were not included in that number to even get 25 million. So we're not getting really what we need for today, current day. So in the December 12th Common Council meeting, FGM was present to present some options. 49.2, again, the current estimate, and I will talk about the fact that that's already been lowered to a degree. There are some efficiencies that we found and some modifications that we can make that don't overly impact the building. Dropping down to $45 million, we can build a portion of the training facility without building all of the capabilities inside of it. Reduction in quality of interior and exterior materials, eliminate exterior amenities, and limited sustainability features. You drop down into the $40 million range, zero sustainability features, reduction in quality of building systems, probable reduction in required square footage. We are here, and we're here 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago because I think things were underbuilt back then, and out of respect of the idea of overbuilding, we're trying to find something in the middle that doesn't have to end up costing more money, because if we redo this again in the future, it's just going to cost more money. Quickly going through this investment. So right now, $35 million is budgeted. Doing some quick math for an example here, average home with 300 valuation, they're $381,000. Split over a 20-year term, assuming 3% interest, we're talking $16.28 a month. Yep, there we go. So for a $7 a month difference, that gets us up to the $50 million range to include everything that we're talking about over here, which we feel, and I think some people could probably agree, don't have to, that's a greater savings over time.
And one thing to note, we all recognize the fact that those numbers do not include operational costs. With every building, there's operational costs, regardless if it's a $35 million construction project or a $50 million construction project.
So speaking of operating costs, depending on sustainability features and decisions that are made in the near future, we're talking at least $500,000. Now, the other thing that we're talking about growth, right? So that cost is spread over our current tax base. As our tax base grows, that impact is modified and changes, right? So that's a component here. So as I mentioned, work is underway to refine the project estimate. Revenue generated by the training components, we would be charging outside agencies just like they charge us, to the tune of $15,000 or so a year for training. We'd be charging outside agencies for that training and the use of that space. And Deputy Chief Leahy is going to quickly talk about the grant.
Currently, we are working on an application through the State of Wisconsin Department of Administration for a non-state construction grant. Under some of the guiding purposes of that grant, public safety has been identified as a potential recipient for grant dollars. As a caveat to the public safety purpose, they've specifically identified a regional training center. In order for the city to successfully apply for that grant, we would need to have, in my opinion and many of the opinions that we've discussed this grant with, we would have to have those training components. We would not be able to consider ourselves a police regional training center if we did not have the multipurpose tactical training bay, the defensive tactics room, as well as the large community room. In an ideal world, we would also want to prove local government support. One of those items was the approving of the schematic design. That's going to be obviously pushed back until February at this point for the vote. And this application is due January 31st. We are trying to work some ways around getting the full resolution of approving the schematic design to show that level of support from the government. And we are already working on receiving letters of support from our community organization partners in our community, as well as local law enforcement, to show that there's an actual regional impact on bringing these other training components. So it could mean $4 to $10 million off the cost of this project if it is approved by the Department of Administration.
So return on our investment, we already talked about these things. Unfortunately, some of these things we can't put a price on. We cannot put a price on some of these things. Some of them we can, but enhanced and more efficient service, a more capable and competent police force, we see what that translates to. Meeting our current and future space needs to save time, so we're not redoing this process again in the future. Increased retention, we're going to talk about here in a second. Potential savings through reduction in risk and loss. Revenue from training components, and additional space for the community, and the decreased vehicle idling pays. We can easily put numbers on that. Now in summary, again, key points. This is an expansion project. We've run out of space. We need to grow. We're already here 10 years later after the space needs study was done. We don't want to delay this further. This is only going to get more expensive. Decrease in service level and efficiencies, repeat of our current situation, no space for new staff. There's talk about a referendum, adding city staff to meet city needs. There's no place for them to go. There is no office space available at City Hall, and there's certainly no space in the police department to expand. Increased recruitment and retention issues. We talk about who this facility is for and who is working in these facilities, and talk about young officers joining our department, our future, leading our department, serving our community. This facility is primarily built for the people that go out and serve our community. This is not a place where you are coming to under ideal circumstances more often than not, but this is a place where our officers come on a daily basis to do their work, their office space, and they come to make sure that they're well and they go home in the same condition to their loved ones. If you were a parent of someone that was considering a career in law enforcement, and you would have your concerns about that, where do you want them to work? Do you want them to work in a community that prioritizes their people, their wellness, their anything, any aspect of their career and their training, that investment? Where do you want them to work? We are responsible for our community's sons and daughters. We are responsible for that. As a community, as police leadership, we're all responsible. We're all responsible for the wellness of our community. We go out and we serve. We think that this is an investment in our people and our community. We don't have to ask all these questions or answer all these questions. We fully recognize that there are tons of different ways that we can spend money, that we can prioritize things. But as a community, what do we want to do? Do we want to, where do we want to go with this? We are confident that this facility will provide these things. Just to hammer home retention, because it is one thing that we can put a price on. We continually have people leave our department for other jurisdictions for pay, primarily. We lost 6 individuals to the Dane County Sheriff's Office. They're paying well over $100,000, close to a tune of $120,000, $130,000, when our officers top out around $85,000. Money is not everything. It's a huge component to it, but the investment that we can make in our people is going to help attract people. The analogy I used before is you're a top high school athletic talent. Where do you think you're going to want to go and play college sports? The place where they have the brand new facilities, where they clearly are making an investment and taking care of their people. Again, people are our number one resource. We serve people through people, but we also have the space to make sure that those people are trained appropriately and are taken care of. So we think that as we address several crises, that this is an approach that meets our needs both now and in the future, and can help really serve our community in the best way possible. I'm going to take questions here. I'll stay as late as we can. But next steps, there is a council update scheduled for the upcoming council meeting. So we talk about opportunities to speak on this project, January 9th. And correct, I just want to make sure I have February 13th correct. Is that correct, Mayor? February 13th? Yeah. Okay. So February 13th, council consideration of the schematic design, and we have to have that to move forward on a number of things, and the potential budget amendments. And then the next step after that is design development. All of this information, including these meetings, our slides, everything is going to be posted. There's a ton of information already on our website. That QR code will take you there. And there's a landing page on our website that will take you to the main page with all this info. And then as far as feedback, you can take a picture of that if you'd like, but it's also on the webpage. You can send comments, again, that will go to Common Council. the design team. If you have questions you want to ask via email, we'll respond that way as well when possible. So with that, I'll take some questions here. Keeping in mind we're well past our time. I think you were first up over here.
I just have a couple questions around the training unit, and I want to pause. I appreciate you stopping after every section to take questions. I know it probably made it longer, but it was super helpful. Could you just note how much does the tactical area cost? And then a second question, just thinking about, I found what the other officer was saying. I'm so sorry, I forget your name. But you were bringing up the idea of this potential grant, which I think is super interesting, and also the idea that like this space could potentially generate revenue maybe in the future. Is there a potential in the plan to ever consider a single story or a way to build scaffolds to add additions to something, like not the same scale, but the Verona ice rink? Right? They built one, going back to hockey, they built the one rink, and then they came to us on the school board and asked for money as part of that from many different areas. And once they funded that, they then built the second rink. So I'm wondering, has that been considered in this scenario where if we do get the grant funding and we can get commitments from other municipalities to make it a revenue generating space, like would that ever be in the plans to pause and build that as a second phase?
I know you. I can answer that. Just real quick for those things that Colleen's been raising her hand. Go for that. Yes, yes, and yes. I don't want to say revenue builder, but I like to say at least recover some of the money for operational costs. Currently, we are in a consortium with 5 cities. We're one of the 5: Monona, Verona, Sun Prairie, and Middleton. We share an RMS system together. So just to give you a number, we pay Dane County and Madison approximately $12,000 a year for our sworn to use their spaces, whether it's a classroom or whether it's the range. We spend approximately that for that number. There, amongst the MPSI's team, that's over 200 sworn right there. And you're talking about many more municipalities. So if we open it up, we're looking at just having the training piece. And here's the important piece about having the 3 pieces, is I don't want to travel to one side of the city or an area of the city if all I can use is classroom. But if I have the classroom, that room, scenarios, and range, now we can spend our day there and accommodate the training we're going to accommodate for whatever cities are going to use it. So if we're looking at that, that's the buy-in from the other municipalities. If you just throwing out 200 sworn off of those 5 cities, you're talking about approximately $45,000 just in space needs. So I don't like to say generate revenue to make money, because Madison's not making money, or Dane County. It's to at least cover the operational costs. So that I feel very confident that we'll be able to do using this facility, and depending on what else comes that way, we'll be able to accommodate to do that.
To take that out of the initial build and build it when that grant funding comes? And can you mention how much that part of the building costs?
The range alone is approximately $3 million. A lot of that is not in the square alone, it's in the HVAC system. So that's where your big cost comes from. So that's in that piece alone. The other rooms will still be utilized for multi-purpose. The community room is still a conference room, it's still pieces like that. You cannot piece it in later for this grant. You have to apply it as the part of the schematic to say this is what we're looking to get. And Matt can explain that better, because he's the one that's writing the grant for us, and he's the one that read the grant inside and out. Am I misspeaking on that?
You have to have the schematic design with those things incorporated, already approved, to show that there's a commitment that that's what's going to be built. And then if it doesn't come to fruition, then there's a little caveat, which is not necessarily what's going to happen, but the state can come in and then basically take that space away that you use the grant money for if you didn't actually build appropriately and you didn't use that space appropriately for what you intended it.
So just real quick, dropping down, so these elements in here, we talked about identifying some key things. So dropping down that roughly 10 $3 million now gets us into the $45 million range. And again, there's the breakdown between the costs there. So again, talking about building things in later and the additional cost, yes, it's a big cost up front, but some of those things costing over time may end up costing more. There is some possibility of other funding sources coming in there to help fill that space, but really the only way to accommodate is at least build the shell of that now and then fill that in later. I was told I was ignoring a question over here. I'm sorry.
A few comments. First off, thank you guys for taking your time every night this week. It feels like there's been 4 meetings. But I'd also like to implore our alders, consider this. You're leaving $4 to $10 million on the table that could be used for something that's going to benefit the whole city. Please do something about that. That's a crazy amount of money to not take advantage of for the purposes that have been identified. And I prefer officers who are trained responding to anything and maintaining safety in our community. So if I can vote for, please train the young officers especially who are, they're minutes into their careers. So those are my comments.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Tom Thorson, I was on the Police and Fire Commission with Greg for, well, we were 3 years that we overlapped. We were elders, right? Yeah. And had a career in law enforcement myself. And before the presentation even started, the chief said, I showed Heather here that, you do what you train. And the training component to me is so important because it's such a wise investment. And it really helps make a difference in the community to have the community safe, to make sure, that people are properly trained. And it would be penny wise and dollar foolish to cut training funds. It's just like investing in the university. It's smart to invest in the university because it has a huge return later on. So hopefully, I think thank you very much for this presentation.
Thank you, sir. In the back.
Thanks, Chief. A comment and a couple of questions and observations. So I'm a former alder. I did go through the Citizens Academy, which I thought was extremely helpful. I feel like I know from talking to several of you up there that we compete, for example, for officers with the county, with the city, with other Dane County jurisdictions. And the majority of our taxes, our tax dollars here in the city don't go to the city. They go to the county, they go to Madison College, which shut down the range that we went to, the Citizens Academy. So I know there's a need for a range. But it just seems to me like we're not getting any collaboration from them. That, the county could backstop that contingency, which is over 10% of the project cost. That's a high contingency. I also understand we haven't had a lot of competing GCs to look at as general contractors to build this building. So there are a lot of ways this could be a little cheaper. And then lastly, my comment is I feel like you guys are kind of out there doing this by yourselves. If the city is going to gain 17,000 feet, other staffers, other departments should be here talking about that. And so it's a little frustrating, that, I don't see the collaboration. And finally, I guess my comment is I like the fact that you're out here now in the community. I've been to 2 of the meetings this week, and I'm hearing a lot of good stuff. Thank goodness we're recording. Thanks, Back TV. I think that this is a golden opportunity for the city of Fitchburg to get that community buy-in and to be a really good department. I want you guys to be successful. And I feel like your hearts are in this, and I really want you to be able to have officers that don't just have 2 or 3 years experience. I heard when I was on the council, it's $100,000 to hire 1 new staffer for the city. I assume it's at least that much. So turnover kills us, and the costs just keep going up. I was not known as the fiscal hawk, but I look at this and I say, there are places all over in this $50 million that we could get help. Doesn't all have to be on the backs of the taxpayer.
I'm just going to quickly bring up one thing here is the question of having other people jump in on the costs here associated. And yes, I agree, collaboration is great. Now, collaboration comes a lot of sharing and a lot of requirements that come along with it. And are we then replicating a system down the road where now we are limiting our training space because we've gone into an agreement with some other group that they're going to get X amount of training space, and now 5-10 years from now, we're back in the same. It's something to consider as part of that conversation, but it's certainly a good point.
And another challenge with that is just elected officials. We have 8 alders currently, and let me ask you, do you all agree on the same thing as alders? Areta, right? I'm asking you because now you include county, now you call it other municipalities. It's even one thing. We are a part of a consortium with 4 other cities that I stated. I wasn't a part of it, but I was told, I don't know which one of you were involved in it 15 years ago when it got started, 15 plus years ago. A decision had to be approved by 5 different councils to bring that together. That gets very, very complicated. When you bring other government to work together, it's not that you don't want to, but it becomes a very, very difficult thing to do amongst elected officials.
All right, we are at the, I'm also gonna pause for a brief moment. If you have been here for too long and you're tired of listening to any of us up here, you can leave. There's not gonna be any judgment. We're not holding you here, but we'll also stay and answer questions. But
Absolutely.
I just wanna make sure that if you need to depart, please feel free to depart. Thank you for your time.
And one thing I want to add, for those of you that you're leaving before I leave, oftentimes, and I've been told by certain people in the audience that it looks like I'm upset and I'm tired and I'm screaming at you. I call it's football talk. I used to coach football. I coach Little League, and that's where the voice projection sometimes comes out. So if you took anything that I'm upset, I'm not. That's just the way I project my voice. So thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Okay, there it is.
Other questions that are out there as we pause briefly? Yep, I think we're both up at the same time here, so I'll start in front.
Actually, I had a question for the chief. You talked about how the tactical training room could be used to sort of simulate the stressful situations that could maybe better prepare officers to prevent officer-involved shootings and deaths. Do you know, there are obviously plenty of places that already have these sorts of rooms. Do you have any evidence that training in these rooms has meaningfully reduced officer-involved shootings in other places?
I not only have that, I have video, but I should say I have video. I saw video, and I used to have it when I retired. The question was, do I have any evidence that more training reduces that, to get you up to that level of stress, reduces the lethality or the use of force?
Specifically in something like a tactical training room?
Tactical training room. I could tell you about a group, and this is factual. The Milwaukee Police Tactical Enforcement Unit, their SWAT team. Some of those individuals on there have been removed, but this is where my experience is coming from and my data's coming from. They had snipers that are actually, even currently while they were employed, would get called out from the military for a month deployment somewhere in the Middle East to do a job and come back. That's their qualification. So when you talk about skills, they had some very, very good skills. They trained regularly. And their actual, the tactical situations that they go out there, that they actually get called out to, are like basically every other day. They can get over 300 deployments in a given year with 0 uses of force when it comes to using the firearm. And in one of those situations that I was there, and I heard there was a recent one this year, or 2023, one of them were shot. So there was one incident where during an entry, a tactical enforcement officer was shot and killed. Those officers that were there, and it's on body cam, had all the authority and opportunity to take that person out. But based on their training and ability to keep control, they were still able to handle that tactically, order that person to drop the gun. They tried life-saving measures. It was all training. It all happened like everything that happened short of saving the officer's life was seamless. So I can attest that their training is some of the top-notch in the country, if not the world.
May I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
Do you also think that depending on the sort of training that's done in a tactical training room, which can be, it's like a blank slate, right? You could train anything in that there's a possibility that training for high-intensity violent situations in a disproportionate level to the types of encounters that police face in a particular community could increase the risk of use of force in situations where they shouldn't.
Can I jump in and take that? Go ahead.
You can add on to it, but it's all based on what you're training. As I stated, if you're bringing other entities in there, first of all, it's just one component. There's a multitude of components. As I stated, if you just taught the tactical component without the culture diversity piece, without the professional communications, like crisis negotiations aspect, if you're just teaching one component, maybe your outcome is different, but there's a multitude of things that you have to train. And I think we're getting sidetracked by saying this is all we're going to train. I want to train this, I want to train this, I want to train this, and this is just an option. Does that make sense?
Is there a place where the public will be able to have access and get a better understanding of the kinds of training that's going to be happening in these rooms?
That would be the goal, and that's what I stated with Mr. Jones here from the NAACP. We'd like to bring other units because we also want to get other perspectives.
So when we go to the range, and we can only go to the range 4 times a year, we know with certainty that we're going to fire our weapon, right? We know with certainty that there's going to be a scenario that we're going to place and we're going to fire our weapon. This space will allow us unlimited times to go into the same space where we have the ability to fire our weapon and have a scenario where we don't fire any weapons. Does that make sense in the sense that we're going into that facility, we're going to use other tools, de-escalation, conversation, other tactics, team tactics. Sometimes our scenario might even be you're going into that room and you're going to walk out of that room without even, because just removing yourself from the situation is the safest thing possible.
Here's one piece that as soon as I came into Fitchburg, I asked, how many of us have been trained here at Fitchburg in crisis negotiations? 0. You know what the response is? Honest to God, the response. How many have been trained? And I call it crisis negotiation, and that training is above and beyond what you all have heard with CIT. I would say crisis negotiation and down. The reason why is I was a part of the board statewide that taught crisis negotiations, right? And that's a lot of psychology that goes into it. But 0. And you know what the other response was? We don't do crisis negotiations. If we need to do that, we call in Dane County Sheriffs. And when you're in a growing facility and Sheriff's Department is also hurting for staffing, what happens if they don't come or can't come? We don't have anybody that can communicate and de-escalate. And it took me, we brought in the FBI to give free training to the county. How many did we send?
We had 5 out of that class, and that was countywide.
And that's just one class. And when you're talking about this, I'm talking about a whole total different part of it that goes to make this an option and use this as a primary for negotiations. There's a 40-hour basic training component to that. And then there's how should I say it, training after that goes, so every year, to maintain the standards of a crisis negotiator, minimum of 40 hours of training. So I was tasked with coming up with the 40 hours of retraining every year to keep the certification for the statewide crisis negotiations. But the point that I'm making is, I came here, we got 0, and now we got 5. They trained last year, now I got to find them training this year so they can enhance their skills, because the basic 40, that doesn't mean you're an expert. That's just getting you entered into that field. Yes, ma'am.
So I appreciate that you're talking about the types of training. So we do understand, especially here in Dane County. Dane County has worked really hard for criminal legal reform. We have a lot of spaces that are working very hard to reduce incarceration. What we have found is that once we implement reforms, what's left is racial disparity. And the reason why what's left is racial disparity is inherent bias, sometimes over-policing, root causes, things of that sort. So how will your facility address what's left after we've done these reforms? Because I will say on the county end, we've done a lot of really amazing work to put into place reforms, but either A, they're not being utilized, right? There are ways that we can refer folks directly from the streets to our restorative systems. And second, we do know and understand that there is implicit bias and there is structural racism. If there was not implicit bias and structural racism, the way that those reforms would work would mean that there would not be racial disparities at the end. But there is, and all of the top experts say that is why. So can you address how that is going to be implemented into this?
Absolutely. Having this opportunity and having the space the sky's the limit, and what I mean by the sky's the limit is who are we collaborating with, what community groups. I could just tell you what Ned is up to, and a detective. We were a part of the GVRI that was established by the U.S. Attorney's Office, Group Violence Reduction, that's funded through Project Safe Neighborhood. These are federal funded programs through the U.S. Attorney's Office that look and see how can the federal government help fund projects that help the area. It's primarily geared towards Madison, but I had worked with GVRI and PSN in the past, so the U.S. Attorney Tim O'Shea reached out to myself. We connected Ned, who's on the support. So Ned is involved in investigation. His command is investigation support of the department. And he got together to work on reviews of crime in Dane County. So when you say how this works, I'm bringing it back to the community component. We started that now, how long has it been? 2 years or one full year? Or 2 full years?
Well, yeah.
2 full?
Years, yeah.
2 full years, and they had the opportunity to travel down to Indianapolis, Indiana for the PSN conference to identify that piece. The program is up and running and it's been successful. But guess what it's missing? The community component. So right before Christmas, I sat down with Tim O'Shea. So when you talk about these pieces, there is no one group. When you talk about this, it's a broader group to custom fit the needs of whatever that problem is. You know, there's a lot of people that are involved in violence, gun violence, but if you look at their record, they're also involved in family violence. So maybe you can use a family violence component or program to help that individual before they recidivate to the point where now they got to go back to prison, or reentry programs. The sky's the limit, but having the space, having the capacity, that's what I say. These are things that we can bring back in these programs. And when we say training, everybody thinks training, we're talking about pistol training. That's one component to a plethora of things that we can do and programs that we can do. But what we're trying to do here in Dane County through our piece with the U.S. Attorney this year, if we get the time and, kind of move from this roadshow, and I'll get to the policing job that we have to do in the command, I'm tasked with the Tim O'Shea to start setting up this community component piece. And I'd like to get that going. We talked a little bit about it yesterday. Yes.
And ask this question. How many of you saw the video out of Kenosha, Wisconsin, where the police went into an Applebee's and arrested 2 individuals, so forth? Some of you saw it, right? Here's my vision for the training center when I said we had it. It's those kinds of real-life events that we can, as a community and as a collective body with our local law enforcement people, view those videos, have conversations about them, and do real-life interaction with them. That video was showed to the Law Enforcement Leaders of Color Collaboration a couple of months ago. As a result of that, there was a discussion this past month on Graham versus Connor, the U.S. Supreme Court decision on standards for use of force. That was really telling. It shows a difference in terms of what can happen, what should happen, what did happen. All I'm saying is, I see this facility as a conduit for us, I can't speak for any other groups, the NAACP, to be a part of some training activities, real-life training activities in the community. So that's the community part that I'm expecting to go forward with. And to speak to the issue here, what came out of that discussion with law enforcement and community folk, we community folk saw bias, racism, systemic racism in the actions, conduct, and culture of the white police officer. To go to your point. But what we also heard from our police officers is we saw the legal, logical application of the use of force rules and regulations. Those kind of discussions got to happen before we can come to any kind of common ground about that. But use of force is a big issue. I don't want to see it violated here in Fitchburg.
No, but again, how does this start? We have to have the playing field to do it.
You got to do it.
And on top of that too, that video, the day after that video, we could be downstairs or in that training room and having supervisors, we have state trained instructors recreating that exact scenario. We could even bring in role players from community organizations the next day to prevent that scenario from being repeated down the road.
It was an excellent rendition of a real life situation.
And I'm going to give you a little deeper. I found a little bit more about that, and I'll share it with you later. But even this, on those, what is so important about learning from that piece? Because you don't know when you're going to, the manager in that place got rid of the video and only showed one piece and send that out to spark the thing. And I don't know if they charged her or arrested her, but I think she kind of played a role in escalating that situation, the manager of the restaurant. But what's important about that is even us. What we talked about keeping the facility away so you don't have these First Amendment right individuals to come in and kind of entice us into doing something we shouldn't be doing. The same thing, you're responding to a scene. How do you know you're not being set up to get on camera and look bad? Those are all things that you have to, when you find new things, you have to be able to put them out there as quickly as possible.
All right, we have to be respectful of Blackhawk's time here, so. Yes.
Yeah, so just to follow up on what you just said, you could, the following day, you could be down in your scenario room and reenacting that. Why do you need that space rather than, for instance, a DAT space?
So the DAT space is needed, but just like that?
No, I'm saying, why can't you reenact that scenario in your defense and arrest tactics room rather than requiring that extra 5,900 square foot space to perform those scenarios,
That's just one scenario. And you're absolutely right. We can use that space, the DAT space, to reenact that scenario. But then you also have the scenario that Lieutenant Hartwick brought up before of the Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. There's that scenario that you would need to have. So there's a concept in training called training scars. Okay, so when you set up an officer for there's only one possible route this scenario has to go. So when they see it in real life, that's because of that muscle memory, because that's the training, because that's the way we did. If you have kids and you're trying to help them with math these days, you know the one way that you were taught, but they're only taught one single way to do it. And if you try to challenge that, oh geez, you're set up for a confrontation there. So what you have to do in an actual training scenario is to make it as real as possible and then reinforce whatever technique that you want to reinforce in multiple different scenarios with all of your available tools to make it as real life as possible. Because there could be a situation where that officer decides, oh, I need to use my firearm in this case, go through the scenario, and then correct that mistake or add in a different element. So while I get your point that that's one scenario, sure, we can use the DAT room, we could use a classroom, but then there's so many other scenarios that we have to provide officers with those environments to be safe, to induce stress. They could be running up on the treadmill in the fitness room upstairs, come down to the range, and then instantly go into a scenario to mimic that I just had to run across a park or a building or something like that.
I know the answer to this question. Are there any doctors in the room? Do doctors train with their real instruments, or do they train with a plastic instrument? A real instrument that cuts flesh and bleeds and things like that. And that's what the point that we're talking about is that this tactical training bay has the ability to go into there and deliver that type of training. Okay, we are well past the time that we are expecting you to be here and my family for me to be here and the facility for us to be here. So we'll stick around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.